It was the same with the places at the desks and forms. It was the same with the groves of deserted bedsteads I peeped at, on my way to, and when I was in my own bed. I remember dreaming night after night of being with my mother as she used to be, or of going to a party at Mr. Peggotty's, or of traveling outside the stagecoach, or of dining again with my unfortunate friend the waiter, and in all these circumstances making people scream and stare by the unhappy disclosure that I had nothing on but my little nightshirt and that placard. In the monotony of my life, and in my constant apprehension of the reopening of the school, it was such an insupportable affliction. I had long tasks every day to do with Mr. Mell, but I did them, there being no Mr. and Miss Murdstone here, and got through them without disgrace. Before and after them, I walked about, supervised, as I have mentioned, by the man with the wooden leg. How vividly I call to mind the damp about the house, the green cracked flagstones in the court, an old leaky water butt, and the discolored trunks of some of the grim trees, which seemed to have dripped more in the rain than other trees, and to have blown less in the sun. At one we dined, Mr. Mell and I, at the upper end of a long, bare dining room, full of deal tables and smelling of fat. Then we had more tasks until tea, which Mr. Mell drank out of a blue teacup and I out of a tin pot, all day long, and until 7 or 8 in the evening, Mr. Mell, at his own detached desk in the schoolroom, worked hard with pen, ink, ruler, books, and writing paper, making out the bills, as I found, for last half year. When he had put up his things for the night, he took out his flute and blew at it until I almost thought he would gradually blow his whole being into the large hole at the top and ooze away at the keys. I picture my small self in the dimly lighted rooms, sitting with my head upon my hand, listening to the doleful performance of Mr. Mell and conning tomorrow's lessons. I picture myself with my books shut up, still listening to the doleful performance of Mr. Mell and listening through it to what used to be at home and to the blowing of the wind on Yarmouth Flats and feeling very sad and solitary. I picture myself going up to bed among the unused rooms and sitting on my bedside crying for a comfortable word from Peggotty. I picture myself coming downstairs in the morning and looking through a long, ghastly gash of a staircase window at the school bell hanging on the top of an outhouse with a weathercock above it, and dreading the time when it shall ring J, Steerforth and the rest to work, which is only second, in my foreboding apprehensions, to the time when a man with a wooden leg shall unlock the rusty gate to give admission to the awful Mr. Creakle. I cannot think I was a very dangerous character in any of these aspects, but in all of them I carried the same warning on my back. Mr. Mell never said much to me, but he was never harsh to me. I suppose we were company to each other, without talking. I forgot to mention that he would talk to himself sometimes, and grin, and clench his fist, and grind his teeth, and pull his hair in an unaccountable manner. But he had these peculiarities, and at first they frightened me, though I soon got used to them. Chapter 6. I enlarge my circle of acquaintance. I had led this life about a month, when the man with the wooden leg began to stump about with a mop and a bucket of water, from which I inferred that preparations were making to receive Mr. Creakle and the boys. I was not mistaken, for the mop came into the schoolroom before long, and turned out Mr. Mell and me, who lived where we could, and got on how we could, for some days, during which we were always in the way of 2 or 3 young women, who had rarely shown themselves before, and were so continually in the midst of dust that I sneezed almost as much as if Salem House had been a great snuff-box. One day I was informed by Mr. Mell that Mr. Creakle would be home that evening. In the evening, after tea, I heard that he was come. Before bedtime, I was fetched by the man with the wooden leg to appear before him. Mr. Creakle's part of the house was a good deal more comfortable than ours, and he had a snug bit of garden that looked pleasant after the dusty playground, which was such a desert in miniature that I thought no one but a camel or a dromedary could have fell a home in it. It seemed to me a bold thing even to take notice that the passage looked comfortable as I went on my way, trembling to Mr. Creakle's presence, which so abashed me when I was ushered into it that I hardly saw Mrs. Creakle or Miss Creakle, who were both there in the parlor, or anything but Mr. Creakle, a stout gentleman with a bunch of watch chain and seals in an armchair with a tumbler and bottle beside him. "So," said Mr. Creakle, This is the young gentleman whose teeth are to be filed. Turn him round." The wooden-legged man turned me about so as to exhibit the placard, and having afforded time for a full survey of it, turned me about again, with my face to Mr. Creakle, and posted himself at Mr. Creakle's side. Mr. Creakle's face was fiery, and his eyes were small and deep in his head. He had thick veins in his forehead, a little nose, and a large chin. He was bald on the top of his head, and had some thin, wet-looking hair that was just turning gray, brushed across each temple, so that the two sides interlaced on his forehead. But the circumstance about him which impressed me most was that he had no voice, but spoke in a whisper. The exertion this cost him, or the consciousness of talking in that feeble way, made his angry face so much more angry, and his thick veins so much thicker when he spoke, that I am not surprised, on looking back, at this peculiarity striking me as his chief one. "Now," said Mr. Creakle, "what's the report of this boy?" "There's nothing against him yet," returned the man with the wooden leg. "There has been no opportunity." I thought Mr. Creakle was disappointed. I thought Mrs. and Miss Creakle, at whom I now glanced for the first time, and who were both thin and quiet, were not disappointed. "Come here, sir," said Mr. Creakle, beckoning to me. "Come here," said the man with the wooden leg, repeating the gesture. "I have the happiness of knowing your father-in-law," whispered Mr. Creakle, taking me by the ear, "and a worthy man he is, and a man of a strong character. He knows me, and I know him. Do you know me?" "Hey," said Mr. Creakle, pinching my ear with ferocious playfulness. "Not yet, sir," I said, flinching with the pain. "Not yet? Hey," repeated Mr. Creakle. "But you will soon. Hey, you will soon. Hey," repeated the man with the wooden leg. I afterwards found that he generally acted, with his strong voice, as Mr. Creakle's interpreter to the boys. I was very much frightened, and said I hoped so, if he pleased. I felt, all this while, as if my ear were blazing. He pinched it so hard. "I'll tell you what I am," whispered Mr. Creakle, letting it go at last, with a screw at parting that brought the water into my eyes. "I'm a Tartar." "A Tartar," said the man with the wooden leg. "When I say I'll do a thing, I do it," said Mr. Creakle. "And when I say I will have a thing done, I will have it done." "We'll have a thing done, I will have it done," repeated the man with the wooden leg. "I am a determined character," said Mr. Creakle. "That's what I am. I do my duty. That's what I do. My flesh and blood," he looked at Mrs. Creakle as he said this, "when it rises against me, is not my flesh and blood. I discard it. Has that fellow," to the man with the wooden leg, "been here again?" "No," was the answer. "No," said Mr. Creakle. "He knows better. He knows me. Let him keep away." "I say let him keep away," said Mr. Creakle, striking his hand upon the table, and looking at Mrs. Creakle, "for he knows me. Now you have begun to know me too, my young friend, and you may go. Take him away." I was very glad to be ordered away, for Mrs. and Miss Creakle were both wiping their eyes, and I felt as uncomfortable for them as I did for myself. But I had a petition on my mind which concerned me so nearly that I couldn't help saying, though I wondered at my own courage, "If you please, sir." Mr. Creakle whispered, "Ha! What's this?" and bent his eyes upon me, as if he would have burnt me up with them. "If you please, sir," I faltered, "if I might be allowed, I am very sorry indeed, sir, for what I did, to take this riding off before the boys come back." Whether Mr. Creakle was in earnest, or whether he only did it to frighten me, I don't know, but he made a burst out of his chair, before which I precipitately retreated, without waiting for the escort of the man with the wooden leg, and never once stopped until I reached my own bedroom, where, finding I was not pursued, I went to bed, as it was time, and lay quaking for a couple of hours. Next morning Mr. Sharp came back. Mr. Sharp was the first master, and superior to Mr. Mell. Mr. Mell took his meals with the boys, but Mr. Sharp dined and supped at Mr. Creakle's table. He was a limp, delicate-looking gentleman, I thought, with a good deal of nose, and a way of carrying his head on one side, as if it were a little too heavy for him. His hair was very smooth and wavy, but I was informed by the very first boy who came back that it was a wig, a second-hand one, he said, and that Mr. Sharp went out every Saturday afternoon to get it curled. It was no other than Tommy Traddles who gave me this piece of intelligence. He was the first boy who returned. He introduced himself by informing me that I should find his name on the right-hand corner of the gate, over the top bolt. Upon that I said, "Traddles," to which he replied, "The same," and then he asked me for a full account of myself and family. It was a happy circumstance for me that Traddles came back first. He enjoyed my placard so much that he saved me from the embarrassment of either disclosure or concealment by presenting me to every other boy who came back, great or small, immediately on his arrival, in this form of introduction. "Look here. Here's a game." Happily, too, the greater part of the boys came back low-spirited and were not so boisterous at my expense as I had expected. Some of them certainly did dance about me like wild Indians, and the greater part could not resist the temptation of pretending that I was a dog and patting and soothing me, lest I should bite, and saying, "Lie down, sir," and calling me Towser. This was naturally confusing among so many strangers and cost me some tears, but on the whole it was much better than I had anticipated. I was not considered as being formally received into the school, however, until J. Steerforth arrived. Before this boy, who was reputed to be a great scholar and was very good-looking and at least half a dozen years my senior, I was carried, as before a magistrate. He inquired, under a shed in the playground, into the particulars of my punishment, and was pleased to express his opinion that it was a jolly shame, for which I became bound to him ever afterwards. "What money have you got, Copperfield?" he said, walking aside with me when he had disposed of my affair in these terms. I told him 7 shillings. "You had better give it to me to take care of," he said. "At least, you can if you like. You needn't if you don't like." I hastened to comply with his friendly suggestion, and opening Peggotty's purse, turned it upside down into his hand. "Do you want to spend anything now?" he asked me. "No, thank you," I replied. "You can if you like, you know," said Steerforth. "Say the word." "No, thank you, sir," I repeated. "Perhaps you'd like to spend a couple of shillings or so in a bottle of currant wine by and by, up in the bedroom," said Steerforth. "You belong to my bedroom, I find." It certainly had not occurred to me before, but I said, "Yes, I should like that." "Very good," said Steerforth. "You'll be glad to spend another shilling or so in almond cakes, I dare say." I said, "Yes, I should like that, too." "And another shilling or so in biscuits, and another in fruit." Said Steerforth. "I say, young Copperfield, you're going it." I smiled because he smiled, but I was a little troubled in my mind, too. "Well," said Steerforth, "we must make it stretch as far as we can. That's all. I'll do the best in my power for you. I can go out when I like, and I'll smuggle the prog in." With these words, he put the money in his pocket and kindly told me not to make myself uneasy. He would take care it should be all right. He was as good as his word. If that were all right, which I had a secret misgiving was nearly all wrong, for I feared it was a waste of my mother's 2 half-crowns, though I had preserved the piece of paper they were wrapped in, which was a precious saving. When we went upstairs to bed, he produced the whole 7 shillings worth and laid it out on my bed in the moonlight, saying, "There you are, young Copperfield, and a royal spread you've got." I couldn't think of doing the honors of the feast at my time of life. While he was by, my hand shook at the very thought of it. I begged him to do me the favor of presiding, and my request being seconded by the other boys who were in that room, he acceded to it, and sat upon my pillow, handing round the viands, with perfect fairness, I must say, and dispensing the currant wine in a little glass without a foot, which was his own property. As to me, I sat on his left hand, and the rest were grouped about us on the nearest beds and on the floor. How well I recollect our sitting there, talking in whispers, or their talking, and my respectfully listening, I ought rather to say, the moonlight falling a little way into the room, through the window, painting a pale window on the floor, and the greater part of us in shadow, except when Steerforth dipped a match into a phosphorus box, when he wanted to look for anything on the board, and shed a blue glare over us that was gone directly. A certain mysterious feeling, consequent on the darkness, the secrecy of the revel, and the whisper in which everything was said, steals over me again, and I listen to all they tell me with a vague feeling of solemnity and awe, which makes me glad that they are all so near, and frightens me, though I feign to laugh, when Traddles pretends to see a ghost in the corner. I heard all kinds of things about the school, and all belonging to it. I heard that Mr. Creakle had not preferred his claim to being a Tartar without reason, that he was the sternest and most severe of masters, that he laid about him, right and left, every day of his life, charging in among the boys like a trooper and slashing away, unmercifully, that he knew nothing himself, but the art of slashing, being more ignorant, J. Steerforth said, than the lowest boy in the school, that he had been, a good many years ago, a small hop dealer in the borough, and had taken to the schooling business after being bankrupt in hops and making away with Mrs. Creakle's money, with a good deal more of that sort, which I wondered how they knew. I heard that the man with the wooden leg, whose name was Tungay, was an obstinate barbarian who had formerly assisted in the hop business, but had come into the scholastic line with Mr. Creakle, in consequence, as was supposed among the boys, of his having broken his leg in Mr. Creakle's service, and having done a deal of dishonest work for him, and knowing his secrets. I heard that with the single exception of Mr. Creakle, Tungay considered the whole establishment, masters and boys, as his natural enemies, and that the only delight of his life was to be sour and malicious. I heard that Mr. Creakle had a son, who had not been Tungay's friend, and who, assisting in the school, had once held some remonstrance with his father on an occasion when its discipline was very cruelly exercised, and was supposed, besides, to have protested against his father's usage of his mother. I heard that Mr. Creakle had turned him out of doors in consequence, and that Mrs. and Miss Creakle had been in a sad way ever since. But the greatest wonder that I heard of Mr. Creakle was there being one boy in the school on whom he never ventured to lay a hand, and that boy being J. Steerforth. Steerforth himself confirmed this when it was stated, and said that he should like to begin to see him do it. On being asked by a mild boy, not me, how he would proceed if he did begin to see him do it, he dipped a match into his phosphorus box on purpose to shed a glare over his reply, and said he would commence by knocking him down with a blow on the forehead from the 7 and 6-penny ink bottle that was always on the mantelpiece. We sat in the dark for some time, breathless. I heard that Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mell were both supposed to be wretchedly paid, and that when there was hot and cold meat for dinner at Mr. Creakle's table, Mr. Sharp was always expected to say he preferred cold, which was again corroborated by J. Steerforth, the only parlor boarder. I heard that Mr. Sharp's wig didn't fit him, and that he needn't be so bounceable, somebody else said bumptious, about it because his own red hair was very plainly to be seen behind. I heard that one boy, who was a coal merchant's son, came as a set-off against the coal bill and was called on that account exchange or barter, a name selected from the arithmetic book as expressing this arrangement. I heard that the table beer was a robbery of parents, and the pudding an imposition. I heard that Miss Creakle was regarded by the school in general as being in love with Steerforth, and I am sure, as I sat in the dark, thinking of his nice voice, and his fine face, and his easy manner, and his curling hair, I thought it very likely. I heard that Mr. Mell was not a bad sort of fellow, but hadn't a sixpence to bless himself with, and that there was no doubt that old Mrs. Mell, his mother, was as poor as Job. I thought of my breakfast then, and what it sounded like my Charlie, but I am glad to remember, as mute as a mouse about it. The hearing of all this, and a good deal more, outlasted the banquet some time. The greater part of the guests had gone to bed as soon as the eating and drinking were over, and we, who had remained whispering and listening half undressed, at last betook ourselves to bed too. "Good night, young Copperfield," said Steerforth. "I'll take care of you." "You're very kind," I gratefully returned. "I am very much obliged to you." "You haven't got a sister, have you?" said Steerforth, yawning. "No," I answered. "That's a pity," said Steerforth. "If you had had one, I should think she would have been a pretty, timid, little bright-eyed sort of girl. I should have liked to know her. Good night, young Copperfield." "Good night, sir," I replied. I thought of him very much after I went to bed, and raised myself, I recollect, to look at him where he lay in the moonlight, with his handsome face turned up, and his head reclining easily on his arm. He was a person of great power in my eyes. That was, of course, the reason of my mind running on him. No veiled future dimly glanced upon him in the moonbeams. There was no shadowy picture of his footsteps in the garden that I dreamed of walking in all night. Chapter 7. My first half at Salem House. School began in earnest next day. A profound impression was made upon me. I remember, by the roar of voices in the schoolroom suddenly becoming hushed as death when Mr. Creakle entered after breakfast, and stood in the doorway looking round upon us like a giant in a storybook surveying his captives. Tungay stood at Mr. Creakle's elbow. He had no occasion, I thought, to cry out silence so ferociously, for the boys were all struck speechless and motionless. Mr. Creakle was seen to speak, and Tungay was heard, to this effect. Now, boys, this is a new half. Take care what you're about in this new half. Come fresh up to the lessons, I advise you, for I come fresh up to the punishment. I won't flinch. It will be of no use your rubbing yourselves. You won't rub the marks out that I shall give you. Now get to work, every boy. When this dreadful exordium was over, and Tungay had stumped out again, Mr. Creakle came to where I sat, and told me that if I were famous for biting, he was famous for biting, too. He then showed me the cane, and asked me what I thought of that for a tooth. Was it a sharp tooth, hey? Was it a double tooth, hey? Had it a deep prong, hey? Did it bite, hey? Did it bite? At every question, he gave me a fleshy cut with it that made me writhe. So I was very soon made free of Salem House, as Steerforth said, and was very soon in tears also. Not that I mean to say these were special marks of distinction, which only I received. On the contrary, a large majority of the boys, especially the smaller ones, were visited with similar instances of notice, as Mr. Creakle made the round of the schoolroom. Half the establishment was writhing and crying before the day's work began, and how much of it had writhed and cried before the day's work was over, I am really afraid to recollect, lest I should seem to exaggerate. I should think there never can have been a man who enjoyed his profession more than Mr. Creakle did. He had a delight in cutting at the boys, which was like the satisfaction of a craving appetite. I am confident that he couldn't resist a chubby boy, especially, that there was a fascination in such a subject which made him restless in his mind, until he had scored and marked him for the day. I was chubby myself, and ought to know. I am sure when I think of the fellow now, my blood rises against him with the disinterested indignation I should feel if I could have known all about him without having ever been in his power. But it rises hotly, because I know him to have been an incapable brute who had no more right to be possessed of the great trust he held than to be Lord High Admiral or Commander-in-Chief, in either of which capacities it is probable that he would have done infinitely less mischief. Miserable little propitiators of a remorseless idol, how abject we were to him! What a launch in life, I think it now, on looking back, to be so mean and servile to a man of such parts and pretensions. Here I sit at the desk again, watching his eye, humbly watching his eye, as he rules a ciphering book for another victim whose hands have just been flattened by that identical ruler, and who's trying to wipe the sting out with a pocket handkerchief. I have plenty to do. I don't watch his eye in idleness, but because I am morbidly attracted to it, in a dread desire to know what he will do next, and whether it will be my turn to suffer or somebody else's. A lane of small boys beyond me, with the same interest in his eye, watch it too. I think he knows it, though he pretends he don't. He makes dreadful mouths as he rules the ciphering book, and now he throws his eye sideways down our lane, and we all droop over our books and tremble. A moment afterwards we are again eyeing him. An unhappy culprit, found guilty of imperfect exercise, approaches at his command. The culprit falters excuses and professes a determination to do better tomorrow. Mr. Creakle cuts a joke before he beats him, and we laugh at it. Miserable little dogs, we laugh, with our visages as white as ashes and our hearts sinking into our boots. Here I sit at the desk again, on a drowsy summer afternoon. A buzz and hum go up around me, as if the boys were so many bluebottles. A cloggy sensation of a lukewarm fat of meat is upon me. We dined an hour or two ago, and my head is as heavy as so much lead. I would give the world to go to sleep. I sit with my eye on Mr. Creakle, blinking at him like a young owl. When sleep overpowers me for a minute, he still looms through my slumber, ruling those ciphering books, until he softly comes behind me and wakes me to plainer perception of him, with a red ridge across my back. Here I am in the playground, with my eyes still fascinated by him, though I can't see him. The window at a little distance from which I know he is having his dinner stands for him, and I that instead. If he shows his face near it, mine assumes an imploring and submissive expression. If he looks out through the glass, the boldest boy, Steerforth accepted, stops in the middle of a shout or yell and becomes contemplative. One day, Traddles, the most unfortunate boy in the world, breaks that window accidentally with a ball. I shudder at this moment with the tremendous sensation of seeing it done and feeling that the ball has bounded on to Mr. Creakle's sacred head. Poor Traddles, in a tight sky blue suit that made his arms and legs like German sausages or roly-poly puddings, he was the merriest and most miserable of all the boys. He was always being caned. I think he was caned every day that half year, except one holiday Monday when he was only rulered on both hands and was always going to write to his uncle about it and never did. After laying his head on the desk for a little while, he would cheer up, somehow, begin to laugh again, and draw skeletons all over his slate before his eyes were dry. I used at first to wonder what comfort Traddles found in drawing skeletons, and for some time looked upon him as a sort of hermit who reminded himself by those symbols of mortality that caning couldn't last forever. But I believe he only did it because they were easy and didn't want any features. He was very honorable, Traddles was, and held it as a solemn duty in the boys to stand by one another. He suffered for this on several occasions, and particularly once when Steerforth laughed in church and the beadle thought it was Traddles and took him out. I see him now, going away in custody, despised by the congregation. He never said who was the real offender, though he smarted for it next day, and was imprisoned so many hours that he came forth with a whole churchyard full of skeletons swarming all over his Latin dictionary. But he had his reward. Steerforth said there was nothing of the sneak in Traddles, and we all felt that to be the highest praise. For my part, I could have gone through a good deal, though I was much less brave than Traddles, and nothing like so old, to have won such a recompense. To see Steerforth walk to church before us, arm in arm with Miss Creakle, was one of the great sights of my life. I didn't think Miss Creakle equal to little Emily in point of beauty, and I didn't love her, I didn't dare, but I thought her a young lady of extraordinary attractions, and in point of gentility not to be surpassed. When Steerforth, in white trousers, carried her parasol for her, I felt proud to know him, and believed that she could not choose but adore him with all her heart. Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mell were both notable personages in my eyes, but Steerforth was to them what the sun was to two stars. Steerforth continued his protection of me, and proved a very useful friend, since nobody dared to annoy one whom he honored with his countenance. He couldn't, or at all events he didn't, defend me from Mr. Creakle, who was very severe with me. But whenever I had been treated worse than usual, he always told me that I wanted a little of his pluck, and that he wouldn't have stood it himself, which I felt he intended for encouragement and considered to be very kind of him. There was one advantage, and only one that I know of, in Mr. Creakle's severity. He found my placard in his way when he came up or down behind the form on which I sat, and wanted to make a cut at me in passing. For this reason it was soon taken off, and I saw it no more. An accidental circumstance cemented the intimacy between Steerforth and me in a manner that inspired me with great pride and satisfaction, though it sometimes led to inconvenience. It happened on one occasion, when he was doing me the honor of talking to me in the playground, that I hazarded the observation that something or somebody, I forget what now, was like something or somebody in Peregrine Pickle. He said nothing at the time, but when I was going to bed at night, asked me if I had got that book. I told him no, and explained how it was that I had read it, and all those other books of which I have made mention. And do you recollect them? Steerforth said, "Oh, yes," I replied. I had a good memory, and I believed I recollected them very well. Then I tell you what, young Copperfield, said Steerforth, you shall tell him to me. I can't get to sleep very early at night, and I generally wake rather early in the morning. We'll go over 'em one after another. We'll make some regular Arabian Nights of it. I felt extremely flattered by this arrangement, and we commenced carrying it into execution that very evening. What ravages I committed on my favorite authors in the course of my interpretation of them, I am not in a condition to say, and should be very unwilling to know, but I had a profound faith in them, and I had, to the best of my belief, a simple, earnest manner of narrating what I did narrate, and these qualities went a long way. The drawback was that I was often sleepy at night, or out of spirits and indisposed to resume the story, and then it was rather hard work, and it must be done, for to disappoint or to displease Steerforth was of course out of the question. In the morning, too, when I felt weary, and should have enjoyed another hour's repose very much, it was a tiresome thing to be roused, like the Sultana Scheherazade, and forced into a long story before the getting-up bell rang. But Steerforth was resolute, and as he explained to me, in return, my sums and exercises, and anything in my tasks that was too hard for me, I was no loser by the transaction. Let me do myself justice, however. I was moved by no interested or selfish motive, nor was I moved by fear of him. I admired and loved him, and his approval was return enough. It was so precious to me that I look back on these trifles, now, with an aching heart. Steerforth was considerate, too, and showed his consideration, in one particular instance, in an unflinching manner that was a little tantalizing, I suspect, to poor Traddles and the rest. Peggotty's promised letter, what a comfortable letter it was, arrived before the half was many weeks old, and with it a cake and a perfect nest of oranges and 2 bottles of cowslip wine. This treasure, as in duty bound, I laid at the feet of Steerforth, and begged him to dispense. Now, I'll tell you what, young Copperfield, said he, the wine shall be kept to wet your whistle when you are story-telling. I blushed at the idea, and begged him, in my modesty, not to think of it. But he said he had observed I was sometimes hoarse. The little rupee was his exact expression, and it should be every drop devoted to the purpose he had mentioned. Accordingly, it was locked up in his box and drawn off by himself in a phial and administered to me through a piece of quill in the cork when I was supposed to be in want of a restorative. Sometimes, to make it a more sovereign specific, he was so kind as to squeeze orange juice into it, or to stir it up with ginger, or dissolve a peppermint drop in it. And although I cannot assert that the flavor was improved by these experiments, or that it was exactly the compound one would have chosen for a stomachic, the last thing at night and the first thing in the morning, I drank it gratefully and was very sensible of his attention. We seem, to me, to have been months over Peregrine, and months more over the other stories. The institution never flagged for want of story, I am certain, and the wine lasted out almost as well as the matter. Poor Traddles, I never think of that boy but with a strange disposition to laugh, and with tears in my eyes, was a sort of chorus in general, and affected to be convulsed with mirth at the comic parts, and to be overcome with fear when there was any passage of an alarming character in the narrative. This rather put me out very often. It was a great jest of his, I recollect, to pretend that he couldn't keep his teeth from chattering, whenever mention was made of an alguazil in connection with the adventures of Gil Blas. And I remember that when Gil Blas met the captain of the robbers in Madrid, this unlucky joker counterfeited such an ague of terror that he was overheard by Mr. Creakle, who was prowling about the passage, and handsomely flogged for disorderly conduct in the bedroom. Whatever I had within me that was romantic and dreamy was encouraged by so much storytelling in the dark, and in that respect the pursuit may not have been very profitable to me. But the being cherished as a kind of plaything in my room, and the consciousness that this accomplishment of mine was bruited about among the boys, and attracted a good deal of notice to me, though I was the youngest there, stimulated me to exertion. In a school carried on by sheer cruelty, whether it is presided over by a dunce or not, there is not likely to be much learnt. I believe our boys were, generally, as ignorant a set as any schoolboys in existence. They were too much troubled and knocked about to learn. They could no more do that to advantage than any one can do anything to advantage in a life of constant misfortune, torment, and worry. But my little vanity and Steerforth's help urged me on somehow, and without saving me from much, if anything, in the way of punishment, made me, for the time I was there, an exception to the general body, insomuch that I did steadily pick up some crumbs of knowledge. In this I was much assisted by Mr. Mell, who had a liking for me that I am grateful to remember. It always gave me pain to observe that Steerforth treated him with systematic disparagement, and seldom lost an occasion of wounding his feelings or inducing others to do so. This troubled me the more for a long time, because I had soon told Steerforth, from whom I could no more keep such a secret than I could keep a cake or any other tangible possession, about the two old women Mr. Mell had taken me to see, and I was always afraid that Steerforth would let it out and twit him with it. We little thought, any one of us, I dare say, when I ate my breakfast that first morning and went to sleep under the shadow of the peacock's feathers to the sound of the flute, what consequences would come of the introduction into those almshouses of my insignificant person. But the visit had its unforeseen consequences, and of a serious sort, too, in their way. One day, when Mr. Creakle kept the house from indisposition, which naturally diffused a lively joy through the school, there was a good deal of noise in the course of the morning's work. The great relief and satisfaction experienced by the boys made them difficult to manage, and though the dreaded Tungay brought his wooden leg in twice or thrice, and took notes of the principal offenders' names, no great impression was made by it, as they were pretty sure of getting into trouble tomorrow, do what they would, and thought it wise, no doubt, to enjoy themselves today. It was, properly, a half-holiday, being Saturday. But as the noise in the playground would have disturbed Mr. Creakle, and the weather was not favorable for going out walking, we were ordered into school in the afternoon and set some lighter tasks than usual, which were made for the occasion. It was the day of the week on which Mr. Sharp went out to get his wig curled. So Mr. Mell, who always did the drudgery, whatever it was, kept school by himself. If I could associate the idea of a bull or a bear with anyone so mild as Mr. Mell, I should think of him in connection with that afternoon when the uproar was at its height, as of one of those animals, baited by 1,000 dogs. I recall him bending his aching head, supported on his bony hand, over the book on his desk, and wretchedly endeavoring to get on with his tiresome work, amidst an uproar that might have made the Speaker of the House of Commons giddy. Boys started in and out of their places, playing at puss in the corner with other boys. There were laughing boys, singing boys, talking boys, dancing boys, howling boys. Boys shuffled with their feet. Boys whirled about him, grinning, making faces, mimicking him behind his back and before his eyes, mimicking his poverty, his boots, his coat, his mother, everything belonging to him that they should have had consideration for. "Silence!" cried Mr. Mell, suddenly rising up and striking his desk with the book. "What does this mean? It's impossible to bear it. It's maddening. How can you do it to me, boys?" It was my book that he struck his desk with, and as I stood beside him, following his eye as it glanced round the room, I saw the boys all stop, some suddenly surprised, some half afraid, and some sorry perhaps. Steerforth's place was at the bottom of the school, at the opposite end of the long room. He was lounging with his back against the wall, and his hands in his pockets, and looked at Mr. Mell with his mouth shut up, as if he were whistling, when Mr. Mell looked at him. "Silence, Mr. Steerforth," said Mr. Mell. "Silence yourself," said Steerforth, turning red. "Whom are you talking to?" "Sit down," said Mr. Mell. "Sit down yourself," said Steerforth, "and mind your business." There was a titter and some applause, but Mr. Mell was so white that silence immediately succeeded, and one boy, who had darted out behind him to imitate his mother again, changed his mind and pretended to want a pen mended. "If you think, Steerforth," said Mr. Mell, "that I am not acquainted with the power you can establish over any mind here," he laid his hand, without considering what he did, as I supposed, upon my head, "or that I have not observed you, within a few minutes, urging your juniors on to every sort of outrage against me, you are mistaken." "I don't give myself the trouble of thinking at all about you," said Steerforth, coolly, "so I'm not mistaken, as it happens." "And when you make use of your position of favoritism here, sir," pursued Mr. Mell, with his lip trembling very much, "to insult a gentleman." "What? Where is he?" said Steerforth. Here somebody cried out, "Shame, J. Steerforth." Too bad. It was Traddles, whom Mr. Mell instantly discomfited by bidding him hold his tongue. "To insult one who is not fortunate in life, sir, and who never gave you the least offense, and the many reasons for not insulting whom you are old enough and wise enough to understand," said Mr. Mell, with his lips trembling more and more, "you commit a mean and base action. You can sit down or stand up as you please, sir. Copperfield, go on." Young Copperfield, said Steerforth, coming forward up the room. Stop a bit. I tell you what, Mr. Mell, once for all, when you take the liberty of calling me mean or base or anything of that sort, you are an impudent beggar. You're always a beggar, you know, but when you do that, you are an impudent beggar. I'm not clear whether he was going to strike Mr. Mell, or Mr. Mell was going to strike him, or there was any such intention on either side. I saw a rigidity come upon the whole school as if they had been turned into stone, and found Mr. Creakle in the midst of us, with Tungay at his side, and Mrs. and Miss Creakle looking in at the door, as if they were frightened. Mr. Mell, with his elbows on his desk and his face in his hands, sat for some moments quite still. "Mr. Mell," said Mr. Creakle, shaking him by the arm, and his whisper was so audible now that Tungay felt it unnecessary to repeat his words. "You have not forgotten yourself, I hope?" "No, sir, no," returned the master, showing his face and shaking his head and rubbing his hands in great agitation. "No, sir. No. I have remembered myself. No, Mr. Creakle, I have not forgotten myself. I have remembered myself, sir. I could wish you had remembered me a little sooner, Mr. Creakle. It would have been more kind, sir, more just, sir. It would have saved me something, sir." Mr. Creakle, looking hard at Mr. Mell, put his hand on Tungay's shoulder and got his feet upon the form close by, and sat upon the desk. After still looking hard at Mr. Mell from his throne, as he shook his head and rubbed his hands, and remained in the same state of agitation, Mr. Creakle turned to Steerforth, and said, "Now, sir, as he don't condescend to tell me, what is this?" Steerforth evaded the question for a little while, looking in scorn and anger on his opponent, and remaining silent. I could not help thinking even in that interval. I remember what a noble fellow he was in appearance, and how homely and plain Mr. Mell looked opposed to him. "What did he mean by talking about favorites, then?" said Steerforth at length. "Favorites?" repeated Mr. Creakle, with the veins in his forehead swelling quickly. "Who talked about favorites?" "He did," said Steerforth. "And pray, what did you mean by that, sir?" demanded Mr. Creakle, turning angrily on his assistant. "I meant, Mr. Creakle," he returned in a low voice, "as I said, that no pupil had a right to avail himself of his position of favoritism to degrade me." "To degrade you?" said Mr. Creakle. "My stars! But give me leave to ask you, Mr. What's your name?" And here Mr. Creakle folded his arms, cane and all, upon his chest, and made such a knot at his brows that his little eyes were hardly visible below them. "Whether, when you talk about favorites, you showed proper respect to me?" "To me, sir," said Mr. Creakle, darting his head at him suddenly, and drawing it back again, "the principal of this establishment, and your employer. It was not judicious, sir, I am willing to admit," said Mr. Mell. "I should not have done so if I had been cool." Here Steerforth struck in. "Then he said I was mean, and then he said I was base, and then I called him a beggar. If I had been cool, perhaps I shouldn't have called him a beggar. But I did, and I am ready to take the consequences of it." Without considering, perhaps, whether there were any consequences to be taken, I felt quite in a glow at this gallant speech. It made an impression on the boys, too, for there was a low stir among them, though no one spoke a word. "I am surprised, Steerforth, although your candor does you honor," said Mr. Creakle. "Does you honor? Certainly. I am surprised, Steerforth, I must say, that you should attach such an epithet to any person employed and paid in Salem House, sir." Steerforth gave a short laugh. "That's not an answer, sir," said Mr. Creakle, "to my remark. I expect more than that from you, Steerforth. If Mr. Mell looked homely in my eyes before the handsome boy, it would be quite impossible to say how homely Mr. Creakle looked." "Let him deny it," said Steerforth. "Deny that he is a beggar, Steerforth?" cried Mr. Creakle. "Why, where does he go away begging?" "If he is not a beggar himself, his near relation's one," said Steerforth. "It's all the same." He glanced at me, and Mr. Mell's hand gently patted me upon the shoulder. I looked up with a flush upon my face and remorse in my heart, but Mr. Mell's eyes were fixed on Steerforth. He continued to pat me kindly on the shoulder, but he looked at him. "Since you expect me, Mr. Creakle, to justify myself," said Steerforth, "and to say what I mean, what I have to say is that his mother lives on charity in an almshouse." Mr. Mell still looked at him and still patted me kindly on the shoulder and said to himself, in a whisper, if I heard right, "Yes, I thought so." Mr. Creakle turned to his assistant with a severe frown and labored politeness. "Now, you hear what this gentleman says, Mr. Mell. Have the goodness, if you please, to set him right before the assembled school." "He is right, sir, without correction," returned Mr. Mell in the midst of a dead silence. "What he has said is true. Be so good, then, as declare publicly." "Will you," said Mr. Creakle, putting his head on one side and rolling his eyes round the school, "whether it ever came to my knowledge until this moment?" "I believe not directly," he returned. "Why, you know not," said Mr. Creakle. "Don't you, man? I apprehend you never suppose my worldly circumstances to be very good," replied the assistant. "You know what my position is, and always has been here." "I apprehend, if you come to that," said Mr. Creakle, with his veins swelling again bigger than ever, "that you've been in a wrong position altogether, and mistook this for a charity school. Mr. Mell, we'll part, if you please. The sooner the better." "There is no time," answered Mr. Mell, rising like the present. "Sir, to you," said Mr. Creakle. "I take my leave of you, Mr. Creakle, and all of you," said Mr. Mell, glancing round the room, and again patting me gently on the shoulders. "James Steerforth, the best wish I can leave you is that you may come to be ashamed of what you have done today. At present I would prefer to see you anything rather than a friend, to me, or to anyone in whom I feel an interest." Once more he laid his hand upon my shoulder, and then taking his flute and a few books from his desk, and leaving the key in it for his successor, he went out of the school, with his property under his arm. Mr. Creakle then made a speech, through Tungay, in which he thanked Steerforth for asserting, though perhaps too warmly, the independence and respectability of Salem House, in which he wound up by shaking hands with Steerforth, while we gave 3 cheers. I did not quite know what for, but I suppose for Steerforth, and so joined in them ardently, though I felt miserable. Mr. Creakle then caned Tommy Traddles for being discovered in tears, instead of cheers, on account of Mr. Mell's departure, and went back to his sofa, or his bed, or wherever he had come from. We were left to ourselves now, and looked very blank, I recollect, on one another. For myself, I felt so much self-reproach and contrition for my part in what had happened, that nothing would have enabled me to keep back my tears but the fear that Steerforth, who often looked at me, I saw, might think it unfriendly, or, I should rather say, considering our relative ages, and the feeling with which I regarded him, undutiful, if I showed the emotion which distressed me. He was very angry with Traddles, and said he was glad he had caught it. Poor Traddles, who had passed the stage of lying with his head upon the desk, and was relieving himself, as usual, with a burst of skeletons, said he didn't care. Mr. Mell was ill-used. "Who has ill-used him, you girl?" said Steerforth. "Why, you have," returned Traddles. "What have I done?" said Steerforth. "What have you done?" retorted Traddles. "Hurt his feelings, and lost him his situation." "His feelings?" repeated Steerforth disdainfully. "His feelings will soon get the better of it, I'll be bound. His feelings are not like yours, Miss Traddles. As to his situation, which was a precious one, wasn't it? Do you suppose I am not going to write home, and take care that he gets some money? Polly?" We thought this intention very noble in Steerforth, whose mother was a widow, and rich, and would do almost anything, it was said, that he asked her. We were all extremely glad to see Traddles so put down, and exalted Steerforth to the skies, especially when he told us, as he condescended to do, that what he had been done expressly for us, and for our cause, and that he had conferred a great boon upon us by unselfishly doing it. But I must say that when I was going on with the story in the dark that night, Mr. Mell's old flute seemed more than once to sound mournfully in my ears, and that when at last Steerforth was tired, and I lay down in my bed, I fancied it playing so sorrowfully somewhere, that I was quite wretched. I soon forgot him in the contemplation of Steerforth, who, in an easy amateur way, and without any book, he seemed to me to know everything by heart, took some of his classes until a new master was found. The new master came from a grammar school, and before he entered on his duties, dined in the parlor one day to be introduced to Steerforth. Steerforth approved of him highly and told us he was a brick. Without exactly understanding what learned distinction was meant by this, I respected him greatly for it and had no doubt whatever of his superior knowledge, though he never took the pains with me. Not that I was anybody that Mr. Mell had taken. There was only one other event in this half-year, out of the daily school life, that made an impression upon me which still survives. It survives for many reasons. One afternoon, when we were all harassed into a state of dire confusion, and Mr. Creakle was laying about him dreadfully, Tungay came in and called out in his usual strong way, "Visitors for Copperfield." A few words were interchanged between him and Mr. Creakle, as who the visitors were and what room they were to be shown into. And then I, who had, according to custom, stood up on the announcement being made and felt quite faint with astonishment, was told to go by the back stairs and get a clean frill on before I repaired to the dining room. These orders I obeyed, in such a flutter and hurry of my young spirits as I had never known before. And when I got to the parlor door, and the thought came into my head that it might be my mother, I had only thought of Mr. or Miss Murdstone until then. I drew back my hand from the lock and stopped to have a sob before I went in. At first I saw nobody, but feeling a pressure against the door, I looked round it, and there, to my amazement, were Mr. Peggotty and Ham, ducking at me with their hats, and squeezing one another against the wall. I could not help laughing, but it was much more in the pleasure of seeing them than at the appearance they made. We shook hands in a very cordial way, and I laughed and laughed until I pulled out my pocket handkerchief and wiped my eyes. Mr. Peggotty, who never shut his mouth once, I remember, during the visit, showed great concern when he saw me do this, and nudged Ham to say something. "Cheer up, Moss R. Davy Bore," said Ham, in his simpering way. "Why, how you have growed." "Am I grown?" I said, drying my eyes. I was not crying at anything in particular that I know of, but somehow it made me cry to see old friends. "Growed, Moss R. Davy Bore?" "Ain't he growed?" said Ham. "Ain't he growed?" said Mr. Peggotty. They made me laugh again by laughing at each other, and then we all three laughed until I was in danger of crying again. "Do you know how Mamma is, Mr. Peggotty?" I said, "and how my dear, dear old Peggotty is?" "Uncommon," said Mr. Peggotty. "And little Em'ly and Mrs. Gummidge?" "Uncommon," said Mr. Peggotty. There was a silence. Mr. Peggotty, to relieve it, took 2 prodigious lobsters and an enormous crab and a large canvas bag of shrimps out of his pockets and piled them up in Ham's arms. "You see," said Mr. Peggotty, "knowing as you was partial to a little relish with your wittles when you was along with us, we took the liberty. The old mother biled 'em, she did." "Mrs. Gummidge biled 'em." "Yes," said Mr. Peggotty, slowly, who I thought appeared to stick to the subject on account of having no other subject ready. "Mrs. Gummidge, I do assure you, she biled 'em." I expressed my thanks, and Mr. Peggotty, after looking at Ham, who stood smiling sheepishly over the shellfish, without making any attempt to help him, said, "We come, you see, the wind and tide making in our favor, in one of our Yarmouth lugs to Gravesend. My sister, she wrote to me the name of this here place, and wrote to me as if ever I chanced to come to Gravesend, I was to come over and inquire for Moss R. Davy and give her duty, humbly wishing him well and reporting of the family as they was uncommon to be sure. Little Em'ly, you see, she'll write to my sister when I go back, as I see you, and as you was similarly uncommon, and so we make it quite a merry-go-rounder." I was obliged to consider a little before I understood what Mr. Peggotty meant by this figure, expressive of a complete circle of intelligence. I then thanked him heartily, and said, with a consciousness of reddening, that I supposed little Em'ly was altered too, since we used to pick up shells and pebbles on the beach. "She's getting to be a woman, that's what she's getting to be," said Mr. Peggotty. "Ask him." He meant Ham, who beamed with delight and assent over the bag of shrimps. "Her pretty face," said Mr. Peggotty, with his own shining like a light. "Her learning," said Ham. "Her writing," said Mr. Peggotty. "Why, it's as black as jet, and so large it is, you might see it anywheres." It was perfectly delightful to behold with what enthusiasm Mr. Peggotty became inspired when he thought of his little favorite. He stands before me again, his bluff, hairy face irradiating with a joyful love and pride, for which I can find no description. His honest eyes fire up and sparkle, as if their depths were stirred by something bright. His broad chest heaves with pleasure. His strong, loose hands clench themselves in his earnestness, and he emphasizes what he says with a right arm that shows, in my pygmy view, like a sledgehammer. Ham was quite as earnest as he. I dare say they would have said much more about her if they had not been abashed by the unexpected coming in of Steerforth, who, seeing me in a corner speaking with two strangers, stopped in a song he was singing and said, "I didn't know you were here, young Copperfield," for it was not the usual visiting room, and crossed by us on his way out. I am not sure whether it was in the pride of having such a friend as Steerforth, or in the desire to explain to him how I came to have such a friend as Mr. Peggotty, that I called to him as he was going away. But I said modestly, "Good heaven, how it all comes back to me this long time afterwards. Don't go, Steerforth, if you please. These are two Yarmouth boatmen, very kind, good people, who are relations of my nurse, and have come from Gravesend to see me." I, said Steerforth, returning. "I'm glad to see them. How are you both?" There was an ease in his manner, a gay and light manner it was, but not swaggering, which I still believe to have borne a kind of enchantment with it. I still believe him, in virtue of this carriage, his animal spirits, his delightful voice, his handsome face and figure, and, for aught I know, of some inborn power of attraction besides, which I think a few people possess, to have carried a spell with him to which it was a natural weakness to yield, and which not many persons could withstand. I could not but see how pleased they were with him, and how they seemed to open their hearts to him in a moment. "You must let them know at home, if you please, Mr. Peggotty," I said, "when that letter is sent, that Mr. Steerforth is very kind to me, and that I don't know what I should ever do here without him." "Nonsense," said Steerforth, laughing. "You mustn't tell them anything of the sort. And if Mr. Steerforth ever comes in Norfolk or Suffolk, Mr. Peggotty," I said, "while I am there, you may depend upon it I shall bring him to Yarmouth, if he will let me, to see your house. You never saw such a good house, Steerforth. It's made out of a boat." "Made out of a boat, is it?" said Steerforth. "It's the right sort of a house for such a thorough-built boatman." "So 'tis, sir," said Ham, grinning. "You're right, young Gin L.M.N. Mossar Davy Bore, Gentleman S. right. A thorough-built boatman. Hor, that's what he is, too." Mr. Peggotty was no less pleased than his nephew, though his modesty forbade him to claim a personal compliment so vociferously. "Well, sir," he said, bowing and chuckling, and tucking in the ends of his neckerchief at his breast, "I thank ye, sir, I thank ye. I do my endeavors in my line of life, sir." "The best of men can do no more, Mr. Peggotty," said Steerforth. He had got his name already. "I'll pound it. It's what you do yourself, sir," said Mr. Peggotty, shaking his head, "and what you do well. Right well. I thank you, sir. I'm obleeged to you, sir, for your welcoming manner of me. I'm rough, sir, but I'm ready. Leastways, I hope I'm ready, you understand. My house ain't much for to see, sir, but it's hearty at your service if ever you should come along with Mossar Davy to see it. I'm a reg'lar Dodman, I am," said Mr. Peggotty, by which he meant snail, and this was an allusion to his being slow to go, for he had attempted to go after every sentence, and had somehow or other come back again. "But I wish you both well, and I wish you happy." Ham echoed this sentiment, and we parted with them in the heartiest manner. I was almost tempted that evening to tell Steerforth about pretty little Emily, but I was too timid of mentioning her name, and too much afraid of his laughing at me. I remember that I thought a good deal, and in an uneasy sort of way, about Mr. Peggotty having said that she was getting on to be a woman, but I decided that was nonsense. We transported the shellfish, or the relish as Mr. Peggotty had modestly called it, up into our room unobserved, and made a great supper that evening. But Traddles couldn't get happily out of it. He was too unfortunate even to come through supper like anybody else. He was taken ill in the night. Quite prostrate he was, in consequence of crab, and after being drugged with black draughts and blue pills, to an extent which Dimple, whose father was a doctor, said was enough to undermine a horse's constitution, received a caning and 6 chapters of Greek Testament for refusing to confess. The rest of the half year is a jumble in my recollection of the daily strife and struggle of our lives, of the waning summer and the changing season, of the frosty mornings when we were wrung out of bed, and the cold, cold smell of the dark nights when we were wrung into bed again, of the evening schoolroom dimly lighted and indifferently warmed, and the morning schoolroom, which was nothing but a great shivering machine, of the alternation of boiled beef with roast beef and boiled mutton with roast mutton, of clods of bread and butter, dog's-eared lesson books, cracked slates, tear-blotted copybooks, canings, rulerings, hair cuttings, rainy Sundays, suet puddings, and a dirty atmosphere of ink surrounding all. I well remember, though, how the distant idea of the holidays, after seeming for an immense time to be a stationary speck, began to come towards us and to grow and grow. How from counting months, we came to weeks and then to days, and how I then began to be afraid that I should not be sent for, and when I learned from Steerforth that I had been sent for, and was certainly to go home, had dim forebodings that I might break my leg first. How the breaking up day changed its place fast at last from the week after next to next week, this week, the day after tomorrow, tomorrow, today, tonight, when I was inside the Yarmouth Mail and going home. I had many a broken sleep inside the Yarmouth Mail, and many an incoherent dream of all these things. But when I awoke at intervals, the ground outside the window was not the playground of Salem House, and the sound in my ears was not the sound of Mr. Creakle giving it to Traddles, but the sound of the coachman touching up the horses. Chapter 8. My holidays, especially one happy afternoon. When we arrived before day at the inn where the mail stopped, which was not the inn where my friend the waiter lived, I was shown up to a nice little bedroom with Dolphin painted on the door. Very cold I was, I know, notwithstanding the hot tea they had given me before a large fire downstairs, and very glad I was to turn into the Dolphin's bed, pull the Dolphin's blankets round my head, and go to sleep. Mr. Burkiss, the carrier, was to call for me in the morning at 9 o'clock. I got up at 8, a little giddy from the shortness of my night's rest, and was ready for him before the appointed time. He received me exactly as if not 5 minutes had elapsed since we were last together, and I had only been into the hotel to get change for 6 pence, or something of that sort. As soon as I and my box were in the cart, and the carrier seated, the lazy horse walked away with us all at his accustomed pace. "You look very well, Mr. Burkiss," I said, thinking he would like to know it. Mr. Burkiss rubbed his cheek with his cuff, and then looked at his cuff as if he expected to find some of the bloom upon it, but made no other acknowledgment of the compliment. "I gave your message, Mr. Burkiss," I said. "I wrote to Peggotty." "Ah," said Mr. Burkiss. Mr. Burkiss seemed gruff and answered drily. "Wasn't it right, Mr. Burkiss?" I asked after a little hesitation. "Why, no," said Mr. Burkiss. "Not the message." "The message was right enough, perhaps," said Mr. Burkiss, "but it come to an end there." Not understanding what he meant, I repeated inquisitively, "Came to an end, Mr. Burkiss?" "Nothing come of it," he explained, looking at me sideways. No answer. "There was an answer expected, was there, Mr. Burkiss?" said I, opening my eyes. For this was a new light to me. "When a man says he's willin'," said Mr. Burkiss, turning his glance slowly on me again, "it's as much as to say, that man's a waitin' for answer." "Well, Mr. Burkiss?" "Well," said Mr. Burkiss, carrying his eyes back to his horse's ears, "that man's been a-waitin' for a answer ever since." "Have you told her so, Mr. Burkiss?" "No, no," growled Mr. Burkiss, reflecting about it. "I ain't got no call to go and tell her so. I never said 6 words to her myself. I ain't a-going to tell her so." "Would you like me to do it, Mr. Burkiss?" said I, doubtfully. "You might tell her, if you would," said Mr. Burkiss, with another slow look at me, "that Burkiss was a-waitin' for a answer." "Says you, what name is it?" "Her name." "Ah," said Mr. Burkiss, with a nod of his head. "Peggotty. Chris'en name? Or nat'ral name?" said Mr. Burkiss. "Oh, it's not her Christian name. Her Christian name is Clara." "Is it, though?" said Mr. Burkiss. He seemed to find an immense fund of reflection in this circumstance, and sat pondering and inwardly whistling for some time. "Well," he resumed at length, "says you, Peggotty, Burkiss is waitin' for answer. Says she, perhaps. Answer to what? says you, to what I told you. What is that? Says she. Burkiss is willin', says you. This extremely artful suggestion Mr. Burkiss accompanied with a nudge of his elbow that gave me quite a stitch in my side. After that, he slouched over his horse in his usual manner, and made no other reference to the subject except, half an hour afterwards, taking a piece of chalk from his pocket and writing up, inside the tilt of the cart, Clara Peggotty, apparently as a private memorandum. Ah, what a strange feeling it was to be going home when it was not home, and to find that every object I looked at reminded me of the happy old home, which is like a dream I could never dream again. The days when my mother and I and Peggotty were all in all to one another, and there was no one to come between us, rose up before me so sorrowfully on the road that I'm not sure I was glad to be there. Not sure, but that I would rather have remained away and forgotten it in Steerforth's company. But there I was, and soon I was at our house, where the bare old elm trees wrung their many hands in the bleak wintry air, and shreds of the old rook's nest drifted away upon the wind. The carrier put my box down at the garden gate and left me. I walked along the path towards the house, glancing at the windows, and fearing at every step to see Mr. Murdstone or Miss Murdstone lowering out of one of them. No face appeared, however, and being come to the house, and knowing how to open the door before dark, without knocking, I went in with a quiet, timid step. God knows how infantine the memory may have been, that was awakened within me by the sound of my mother's voice in the old parlor when I set foot in the hall. She was singing in a low tone. I think I must have lain in her arms and heard her singing so to me when I was but a baby. The strain was new to me, and yet it was so old that it filled my heart brimful, like a friend come back from a long absence. I believed, from the solitary and thoughtful way in which my mother murmured her song, that she was alone, and I went softly into the room. She was sitting by the fire, suckling an infant, whose tiny hand she held against her neck. Her eyes were looking down upon its face, and she sat singing to it. I was so far right that she had no other companion. I spoke to her, and she started and cried out. But seeing me, she called me her dear Davy, her own boy, and coming half across the room to meet me, kneeled down upon the ground and kissed me, and laid my head down on her bosom near the little creature that was nestling there, and put its hand to my lips. I wish I had died. I wish I had died then, with that feeling in my heart. I should have been more fit for heaven than I ever have been since. He is your brother, said my mother, fondling me. Davy, my pretty boy, my poor child. And she kissed me more and more, and clasped me round the neck. This she was doing when Peggotty came running in, and bounced down on the ground beside us, and went mad about us both for a quarter of an hour. It seemed that I had not been expected so soon, the carrier being much before his usual time. It seemed, too, that Mr. and Miss Murdstone had gone out upon a visit in the neighborhood, and would not return before night. I had never hoped for this. I had never thought it possible that we three could be together undisturbed, once more, and I felt for the time as if the old days were come back. We dined together by the fireside. Peggotty was in attendance to wait upon us, but my mother wouldn't let her do it, and made her dine with us. I had my own old plate, with a brown view of a man-of-war in full sail upon it, which Peggotty had hoarded somewhere all the time I'd been away, and would not have had broken, she said, for £100. I had my own old mug with David on it, and my own old little knife and fork that wouldn't cut. While we were at table, I thought it a favorable occasion to tell Peggotty about Mr. Burkiss, who, before I had finished what I had to tell her, began to laugh and throw her apron over her face. Peggotty, said my mother, what's the matter? Peggotty only laughed the more, and held her apron tight over her face when my mother tried to pull it away, and sat as if her head were in a bag. What are you doing, you stupid creature? Said my mother, laughing. Oh, drat the man, cried Peggotty. He wants to marry me. It will be a very good match for you. Wouldn't it? Said my mother. Oh, I don't know, said Peggotty. Don't ask me. I wouldn't have him if he was made of gold, nor I wouldn't have anybody. Then, why don't you tell him so? You ridiculous thing, said my mother. Tell him so, retorted Peggotty, looking out of her apron. He has never said a word to me about it. He knows better. If he was to make so bold as say a word to me, I should slap his face. Her own was as red as ever I saw it, or any other face, I think, but she only covered it again for a few moments at a time, when she was taken with a violent fit of laughter, and after 2 or 3 of those attacks, went on with her dinner. I remarked that my mother, though she smiled when Peggotty looked at her, became more serious and thoughtful. I had seen at first that she was changed. Her face was very pretty still, but it looked careworn and too delicate, and her hand was so thin and white that it seemed to me to be almost transparent. But the change to which I now refer was superadded to this. It was in her manner, which became anxious and fluttered. At last she said, putting out her hand and laying it affectionately on the hand of her old servant, "Peggotty, dear, you are not going to be married?" "Me, ma'am," returned Peggotty, staring. "Lord bless you, no. Not just yet?" said my mother tenderly. "Never," cried Peggotty. My mother took her hand and said, "Don't leave me, Peggotty. Stay with me. It will not be for long, perhaps. What should I ever do without you?" "Me leave you, my precious," cried Peggotty. "Not for all the world," and his wife. "Why, what's put that in your silly little head?" For Peggotty had been used of old to talk to my mother, sometimes like a child. But my mother made no answer, except to thank her, and Peggotty went running on in her own fashion. "Me leave you? I think I see myself. Peggotty go away from you? I should like to catch her at it." "No, no, no," said Peggotty, shaking her head and folding her arms. "Not she, my dear. It isn't that there ain't some cats that would be well enough pleased if she did, but they shan't be pleased. They shall be aggravated. I'll stay with you till I am a cross, cranky old woman. And when I'm too deaf and too lame and too blind and too mumbly for want of teeth to be of any use at all, even to be found fault with, then I shall go to my Davy and ask him to take me in. And, Peggotty, says I shall be glad to see you, and I'll make you as welcome as a queen." "Bless your dear heart," cried Peggotty. "I know you will." And she kissed me beforehand, in grateful acknowledgment of my hospitality. After that, she covered her head up with her apron again and had another laugh about Mr. Burkiss. After that, she took the baby out of its little cradle and nursed it. After that, she cleared the dinner table. After that, came in with another cap on, and her work-box and the yard measure and the bit of wax candle, all just the same as ever. We sat round the fire and talked delightfully. I told them what a hard master Mr. Creakle was, and they pitied me very much. I told them what a fine fellow Steerforth was, and what a patron of mine, and Peggotty said she would walk a score of miles to see him. I took the little baby in my arms when it was awake and nursed it lovingly. When it was asleep again, I crept close to my mother's side according to my old custom, broken now a long time, and sat with my arms embracing her waist and my little red cheek on her shoulder, and once more felt her beautiful hair drooping over me, like an angel's wing, as I used to think, I recollect, and was very happy indeed. While I sat thus, looking at the fire and seeing pictures in the red-hot coals, I almost believed that I had never been away, that Mr. and Miss Murdstone were such pictures, and would vanish when the fire got low, and that there was nothing real in all that I remembered, save my mother, Peggotty, and I. Peggotty darned away at a stocking as long as she could see, and then sat with it drawn on her left hand like a glove, and her needle in her right, ready to take another stitch whenever there was a blaze. I cannot conceive whose stockings they can have been that Peggotty was always darning, or where such an unfailing supply of stockings in want of darning can have come from. From my earliest infancy, she seems to have been always employed in that class of needlework, and never by any chance in any other. "I wonder," said Peggotty, who was sometimes seized with a fit of wondering on some most unexpected topic, "what's become of Davy's great-aunt?" "Lor, Peggotty," observed my mother, rousing herself from a reverie, "what nonsense you talk." "Well, but I really do wonder, ma'am," said Peggotty. "What can have put such a person in your head?" inquired my mother. "Is there nobody else in the world to come there?" "I don't know how it is," said Peggotty, "unless it's on account of being stupid, but my head never can pick and choose its people. They come and they go, and they don't come and they don't go, just as they like. I wonder what's become of her." "How absurd you are, Peggotty," returned my mother. "One would suppose you wanted a second visit from her." "Lord forbid," cried Peggotty. "Well then, don't talk about such uncomfortable things," there's a good soul," said my mother. "Miss Betsy is shut up in her cottage by the sea, no doubt, and will remain there. At all events, she is not likely ever to trouble us again." "No," mused Peggotty. "No, that ain't likely at all. I wonder if she was to die, whether she'd leave Davy anything?" "Good gracious me, Peggotty," returned my mother, "what a nonsensical woman you are, when you know that she took offense at the poor dear boy's ever being born at all." "I suppose she wouldn't be inclined to forgive him now," hinted Peggotty. "Why should she be inclined to forgive him now?" said my mother, rather sharply. "Now that he's got a brother, I mean," said Peggotty. My mother immediately began to cry, and wondered how Peggotty dared to say such a thing. As if this poor little innocent in its cradle had ever done any harm to you or anybody else. "You jealous thing," said she. "You had much better go and marry Mr. Burkiss, the carrier." "Why don't you?" "I should make Miss Murdstone happy, if I was too," said Peggotty. "What a bad disposition you have, Peggotty," returned my mother. "You are as jealous of Miss Murdstone as it is possible for a ridiculous creature to be. You want to keep the keys yourself, and give out all the things, I suppose. I shouldn't be surprised if you did, when you know that she only does it out of kindness and the best intentions. You know she does, Peggotty, you know it well." Peggotty muttered something to the effect of "bother the best intentions," and something else to the effect that there was a little too much of the best intentions going on. "I know what you mean, you cross thing," said my mother. "I understand you, Peggotty, perfectly. You know I do, and I wonder you don't color up like fire. But one point at a time. Miss Murdstone is the point now, Peggotty, and you shan't escape from it. Haven't you heard her say, over and over again, that she thinks I am too thoughtless and too, pretty?" suggested Peggotty. "Well," returned my mother, half laughing, "and if she is so silly as to say so, can I be blamed for it?" "No one says you can," said Peggotty. "No, I should hope not, indeed," returned my mother. "Haven't you heard her say, over and over again, that on this account she wished to spare me a great deal of trouble, which she thinks I am not suited for, and which I really don't know myself that I'm suited for? And isn't she up early and late and going to and fro continually? And doesn't she do all sorts of things and grope into all sorts of places, coal holes and pantries, and I don't know where, that can't be very agreeable? And do you mean to insinuate that there is not a sort of devotion in that?" "I don't insinuate at all," said Peggotty. "You do, Peggotty," returned my mother. "You never do anything else, except your work. You're always insinuating. You revel in it. And when you talk of Mr. Murdstone's good intentions—" "I never talked of him," said Peggotty. "No, Peggotty," returned my mother, "but you insinuated. That's what I told you just now. That's the worst of you. You will insinuate. I said at the moment that I understood you, and you see I did. When you talk of Mr. Murdstone's good intentions, and pretend to slight them, for I don't believe you really do, in your heart, Peggotty, you must be as well convinced as I am how good they are, and how they actuate him in everything. If he seems to have been at all stern with a certain person, Peggotty, you understand, and so, I'm sure does Davy, that I am not alluding to anybody present. It is solely because he is satisfied that it is for a certain person's benefit. He naturally loves a certain person on my account, and acts solely for a certain person's good. He is better able to judge of it than I am, for I very well know that I am a weak, light, girlish creature, and that he is a firm, grave, serious man. And he takes," said my mother, with the tears which were engendered in her affectionate nature stealing down her face, "he takes great pains with me, and I ought to be very thankful to him and very submissive to him even in my thoughts. And when I am not, Peggotty, I worry and condemn myself, and feel doubtful of my own heart, and don't know what to do." Peggotty sat with her chin on the foot of the stocking, looking silently at the fire. "There, Peggotty," said my mother, changing her tone, "don't let us fall out with one another, for I couldn't bear it. You're my true friend, I know, if I have any in the world. When I call you a ridiculous creature, or a vexatious thing, or anything of that sort, Peggotty, I only mean that you are my true friend, and always have been, ever since the night when Mr. Copperfield first brought me home here, and you came out to the gate to meet me." Peggotty was not slow to respond, and ratify the treaty of friendship by giving me one of her best hugs. I think I had some glimpses of the real character of this conversation at the time, but I am sure now that the good creature originated it and took her part in it, merely that my mother might comfort herself with the little contradictory summary in which she had indulged. The design was efficacious, for I remember that my mother seemed more at ease during the rest of the evening, and that Peggotty observed her less. When we had had our tea, and the ashes were thrown up, and the candles snuffed, I read Peggotty a chapter out of the crocodile book, in remembrance of old times. She took it out of her pocket. I don't know whether she had kept it there ever since. And then we talked about Salem House, which brought me round again to Steerforth, who was my great subject. We were very happy, and that evening, as the last of its race, and destined evermore to close that volume of my life, will never pass out of my memory. It was almost 10 o'clock before we heard the sound of wheels. We all got up then, and my mother said hurriedly that, as it was so late, and Mr. and Miss Murdstone approved of early hours for young people, perhaps I had better go to bed. I kissed her and went upstairs with my candle directly before they came in. It appeared to my childish fancy, as I ascended to the bedroom where I had been imprisoned, that they brought a cold blast of air into the house, which blew away the old familiar feeling like a feather. I felt uncomfortable about going down to breakfast in the morning, as I had never set eyes on Mr. Murdstone since the day when I committed my memorable offense. However, as it must be done, I went down, after 2 or 3 false starts halfway, and as many runs back on tiptoe to my own room, and presented myself in the parlor. He was standing before the fire with his back to it, while Miss Murdstone made the tea. He looked at me steadily as I entered, but made no sign of recognition whatever. I went up to him, after a moment of confusion, and said, "I beg your pardon, sir. I am very sorry for what I did, and I hope you will forgive me." "I am glad to hear you are sorry, David," he replied. The hand he gave me was the hand I had bitten. I could not restrain my eye from resting for an instant on a red spot upon it, but it was not so red as I turned, when I met that sinister expression in his face. "How do you do, ma'am?" I said to Miss Murdstone. "Ah, dear me," sighed Miss Murdstone, giving me the tea-caddy scoop instead of her fingers. "How long are the holidays?" "A month, ma'am." "Counting from when?" "From today, ma'am." "Oh," said Miss Murdstone, "then here's one day off." She kept a calendar of the holidays in this way, and every morning checked a day off in exactly the same manner. She did it gloomily until she came to 10, but when she got into 2 figures she became more hopeful, and, as the time advanced, even jocular. It was on this very first day that I had the misfortune to throw her, though she was not subject to such weakness in general, into a state of violent consternation. I came into the room where she and my mother were sitting, and the baby, who was only a few weeks old, being on my mother's lap, I took it very carefully in my arms. Suddenly Miss Murdstone gave such a scream that I all but dropped it. "My dear Jane!" cried my mother. "Good heavens, Clara! Do you see?" exclaimed Miss Murdstone. "See what?" "My dear Jane," said my mother. "Where?" "He's got it!" cried Miss Murdstone. "The boy's got the baby!" She was limp with horror, but stiffened herself to make a dart at me and take it out of my arms. Then she turned faint, and was so very ill that they were obliged to give her cherry brandy. I was solemnly interdicted by her, on her recovery, from touching my brother any more on any pretense whatever, and my poor mother, who, I could see, wished otherwise, meekly confirmed the interdict by saying, "No doubt you are right, my dear Jane." On another occasion, when we 3 were together, this same dear baby, it was truly dear to me, for our mother's sake, was the innocent occasion of Miss Murdstone's going into a passion. My mother, who had been looking at its eyes as it lay upon her lap, said, "Davy, come here," and looked at mine. I saw Miss Murdstone lay her beads down. "I declare," said my mother, gently, "they are exactly alike. I suppose they are mine. I think they are the color of mine. But they are wonderfully alike." "What are you talking about, Clara?" said Miss Murdstone. "My dear Jane," faltered my mother, a little abashed by the harsh tone of this inquiry, "I find that the baby's eyes and Davy's are exactly alike." "Clara," said Miss Murdstone, rising angrily, "you are a positive fool sometimes." "My dear Jane," remonstrated my mother. "A positive fool," said Miss Murdstone. Who else could compare my brother's baby with your boy? They're not at all alike. They are exactly unlike. They are utterly dissimilar in all respects. I hope they will ever remain so. I will not sit here and hear such comparisons made." With that, she stalked out and made the door bang after her. In short, I was not a favorite with Miss Murdstone. In short, I was not a favorite there with anybody, not even with myself, for those who did like me could not show it, and those who did not showed it so plainly that I had a sensitive consciousness of always appearing constrained, boorish, and dull. I felt that I made them as uncomfortable as they made me. If I came into the room where they were, and they were talking together, and my mother seemed cheerful, an anxious cloud would steal over her face from the moment of my entrance. If Mr. Murdstone were in his best humor, I checked him. If Miss Murdstone were in her worst, I intensified it. I had perception enough to know that my mother was the victim always, that she was afraid to speak to me or to be kind to me, lest she should give them some offense by her manner of doing so, and receive a lecture afterwards, that she was not only ceaselessly afraid of her own offending, but of my offending, and uneasily watched their looks if I only moved. Therefore I resolved to keep myself as much out of their way as I could, and many a wintry hour did I hear the church clock strike, when I was sitting in my cheerless bedroom, wrapped in my little greatcoat, poring over a book. In the evening, sometimes, I went and sat with Peggotty in the kitchen. There I was comfortable and not afraid of being myself. But neither of these resources was approved of in the parlor. The tormenting humor which was dominant there stopped them both. I was still held to be necessary to my poor mother's training, and, as one of her trials, could not be suffered to absent myself. "David," said Mr. Murdstone, one day after dinner when I was going to leave the room as usual, "I am sorry to observe that you are of a sullen disposition." "As sulky as a bear," said Miss Murdstone. I stood still and hung my head. "Now, David," said Mr. Murdstone, "a sullen, obdurate disposition is of all tempers the worst, and the boy's is of all such dispositions that ever I have seen," remarked his sister, "the most confirmed and stubborn. I think, my dear Clara, even you must observe it?" "I beg your pardon, my dear Jane," said my mother, "but are you quite sure? I am certain you'll excuse me, my dear Jane, that you understand Davy?" "I should be somewhat ashamed of myself, Clara," returned Miss Murdstone, "if I could not understand the boy, or any boy. I don't profess to be profound, but I do lay claim to common sense." "No doubt, my dear Jane," returned my mother, "your understanding is very vigorous." "Oh dear, no. Pray don't say that, Clara," interposed Miss Murdstone angrily. "But I am sure it is," resumed my mother, "and everybody knows it is. I profit so much by it myself, in many ways, at least I ought to, that no one can be more convinced of it than myself, and therefore I speak with great diffidence, my dear Jane, I assure you." "We'll say I don't understand the boy, Clara," returned Miss Murdstone, arranging the little fetters on her wrists. "We'll agree, if you please, that I don't understand him at all. He is much too deep for me. But perhaps my brother's penetration may enable him to have some insight into his character." And I believe my brother was speaking on the subject when we, not very decently, interrupted him. "I think, Clara," said Mr. Murdstone, in a low, grave voice, "that there may be better and more dispassionate judges of such a question than you." "Edward," replied my mother, timidly, "you are a far better judge of all questions than I pretend to be. Both you and Jane are." "You only said something weak and inconsiderate," he replied. "Try not to do it again, my dear Clara, and keep a watch upon yourself." My mother's lips moved, as if she answered, "Yes, my dear Edward," but she said nothing aloud. "I was sorry, David," I remarked, said Mr. Murdstone, turning his head and his eyes stiffly towards me, "to observe that you are of a sullen disposition. This is not a character that I can suffer to develop itself beneath my eyes without an effort at improvement. You must endeavor, sir, to change it. We must endeavor to change it for you." "I beg your pardon, sir," I faltered. "I have never meant to be sullen since I came back." "Don't take refuge in a lie, sir," he returned so fiercely that I saw my mother involuntarily put out her trembling hand as if to interpose between us. "You have withdrawn yourself in your sullenness to your own room. You have kept your own room when you ought to have been here. You know now, once for all, that I require you to be here and not there. Further, that I require you to bring obedience here. You know me, David. I will have it done." Miss Murdstone gave a hoarse chuckle. "I will have a respectful, prompt, and ready bearing towards myself," he continued, "and towards Jane Murdstone, and towards your mother. I will not have this room shunned as if it were infected at the pleasure of a child. Sit down." He ordered me like a dog, and I obeyed like a dog. "One thing more," he said. "I observe that you have an attachment to low and common company. You are not to associate with servants. The kitchen will not improve you in the many respects in which you need improvement. Of the woman who abets you, I say nothing, since you, Clara," addressing my mother in a lower voice, "from old associations and long-established fancies, have a weakness respecting her which is not yet overcome." "A most unaccountable delusion it is," cried Miss Murdstone. "I only say," he resumed, addressing me, "that I disapprove of your preferring such company as Mistress Peggotty, and that it is to be abandoned. Now, David, you understand me, and you know what will be the consequence if you fail to obey me to the letter." I knew well, better perhaps than he thought, as far as my poor mother was concerned, and I obeyed him to the letter. I retreated to my own room no more. I took refuge with Peggotty no more, but sat wearily in the parlor day after day, looking forward to night and bedtime. What irksome constraint I underwent, sitting in the same attitude hours upon hours, afraid to move an arm or a leg lest Miss Murdstone should complain, as she did on the least pretense, of my restlessness, and afraid to move an eye lest she should light on some look of dislike or scrutiny that would find new cause for complaint in mine. What intolerable dullness to sit listening to the ticking of the clock, and watching Miss Murdstone's little shiny steel beads as she strung them, and wondering whether she would ever be married, and if so, to what sort of unhappy man, and counting the divisions in the molding of the chimney-piece, and wandering away with my eyes to the ceiling among the curls and corkscrews in the paper on the wall. What walks I took alone, down muddy lanes in the bad winter weather, carrying that parlor, and Mr. and Miss Murdstone in it, everywhere, a monstrous load that I was obliged to bear, a daymare that there was no possibility of breaking in, a weight that brooded on my wits and blunted them. What meals I had in silence and embarrassment, always feeling that there were a knife and fork too many, and that mine, an appetite too many, and that mine, a plate and chair too many, and those mine, a somebody too many, and that I. What evenings, when the candles came, and I was expected to employ myself, but, not daring to read an entertaining book, pored over some hard-headed, harder-hearted treatise on arithmetic, when the tables of weights and measures set themselves to tunes, as Rule Britannia, or Away with Melancholy, when they wouldn't stand still to be learnt, but would go threading my grandmother's needle through my unfortunate head, in at one ear and out at the other. What yawns and dozes I lapsed into, in spite of all my care. What starts I came out of concealed sleeps with. What answers I never got to little observations that I rarely made. What a blank space I seemed, which everybody overlooked, and yet was in everybody's way. What a heavy relief it was to hear Miss Murdstone hail the first stroke of 9 at night, and order me to bed. Thus the holidays lagged away, until the morning came when Miss Murdstone said, "Here's the last day off," and gave me the closing cup of tea of the vacation. I was not sorry to go. I had lapsed into a stupid state, but I was recovering a little and looking forward to Steerforth, albeit Mr. Creakle loomed behind him. Again Mr. Burkiss appeared at the gate, and again Miss Murdstone in her warning voice said, "Clara," when my mother bent over me to bid me farewell. I kissed her and my baby brother and was very sorry then, but not sorry to go away, for the gulf between us was there, and the parting was there, every day. And it is not so much the embrace she gave me that lives in my mind, though it was as fervent as could be, as what followed the embrace. I was in the carrier's cart when I heard her calling to me. I looked out, and she stood at the garden gate alone, holding her baby up in her arms for me to see. It was cold, still weather, and not a hair of her head, nor a fold of her dress, was stirred as she looked intently at me, holding up her child. So I lost her. So I saw her afterwards in my sleep at school, a silent presence near my bed, looking at me with the same intent face, holding up her baby in her arms. Chapter 9. I have a memorable birthday. I pass over all that happened at school until the anniversary of my birthday came round in March. Except that Steerforth was more to be admired than ever. I remember nothing. He was going away at the end of the half year, if not sooner, and was more spirited and independent than before in my eyes, and therefore more engaging than before. But beyond this, I remember nothing. The great remembrance by which that time is marked in my mind seems to have swallowed up all lesser recollections, and to exist alone. It is even difficult for me to believe that there was a gap of full 2 months between my return to Salem House and the arrival of that birthday. I can only understand that the fact was so, because I know it must have been so. Otherwise, I should feel convinced that there was no interval, and that the one occasion trod upon the other's heels. How well I recollect the kind of day it was. I smell the fog that hung about the place. I see the hoar frost, ghostly, through it. I feel my rimy hair fall clammy on my cheek. I look along the dim perspective of the schoolroom, with a sputtering candle here and there to light up the foggy morning, and the breath of the boys wreathing and smoking in the raw cold as they blow upon their fingers and tap their feet upon the floor. It was after breakfast, and we had been summoned in from the playground, when Mr. Sharp entered and said, "David Copperfield is to go into the parlor." I expected a hamper from Peggotty and brightened at the order. Some of the boys about me put in their claim not to be forgotten in the distribution of the good things, as I got out of my seat with great alacrity. "Don't hurry, David," said Mr. Sharp. "There's time enough, my boy, don't hurry." I might have been surprised by the feeling tone in which he spoke, if I had given it a thought, but I gave it none until afterwards. I hurried away to the parlor, and there I found Mr. Creakle sitting at his breakfast with a cane and a newspaper before him, and Mrs. Creakle with an open letter in her hand. But no hamper. "David Copperfield," said Mrs. Creakle, leading me to a sofa and sitting down beside me. "I want to speak to you very particularly. I have something to tell you, my child." Mr. Creakle, at whom of course I looked, shook his head without looking at me, and stopped up a sigh with a very large piece of buttered toast. "You are too young to know how the world changes every day," said Mrs. Creakle, "and how the people in it pass away. But we all have to learn it, David. Some of us when we are young, some of us when we are old, some of us at all times of our lives." I looked at her earnestly. "When you came away from home at the end of the vacation," said Mrs. Creakle, after a pause, "were they all well?" After another pause, "Was your mamma well?" I trembled without distinctly knowing why, and still looked at her earnestly, making no attempt to answer. "Because," said she, "I grieve to tell you that I hear this morning your mamma is very ill." A mist rose between Mrs. Creakle and me, and her figure seemed to move in it for an instant. Then I felt the burning tears run down my face, and it was steady again. "She is very dangerously ill," she added. I knew all now. She is dead. There was no need to tell me so. I had already broken out into a desolate cry, and felt an orphan in the wide world. She was very kind to me. She kept me there all day, and left me alone sometimes, and I cried, and wore myself to sleep, and awoke and cried again. When I could cry no more, I began to think, and then the oppression on my breast was heaviest, and my grief a dull pain that there was no ease for. And yet my thoughts were idle, not intent on the calamity that weighed upon my heart, but idly loitering near it. I thought of our house, shut up and hushed. I thought of the little baby, who, Mrs. Creakle said, had been pining away for some time, and who, they believed, would die too. I thought of my father's grave in the churchyard by our house, and of my mother lying there beneath the tree I knew so well. I stood upon a chair when I was left alone, and looked into the glass to see how red my eyes were, and how sorrowful my face. I considered, after some hours were gone, if my tears were really hard to flow now, as they seemed to be, what in connection with my loss it would affect me most to think of when I drew near home, for I was going home to the funeral. I am sensible of having felt that a dignity attached to me among the rest of the boys, and that I was important in my affliction. If ever child were stricken with sincere grief, I was. But I remember that this importance was a kind of satisfaction to me when I walked in the playground that afternoon while the boys were in school. When I saw them glancing at me out of the windows as they went up to their classes, I felt distinguished and looked more melancholy and walked slower. When school was over and they came out and spoke to me, I felt it rather good in myself not to be proud to any of them and to take exactly the same notice of them all as before. I was to go home next night, not by the mail, but by the heavy night coach, which was called the Farmer, and was principally used by country people traveling short, intermediate distances upon the road. We had no storytelling that evening, and Traddles insisted on lending me his pillow. I don't know what good he thought it would do me, for I had one of my own, but it was all he had to lend, poor fellow, except a sheet of letter paper full of skeletons, and that he gave me at parting as a soother of my sorrows and a contribution to my peace of mind. I left Salem House upon the morrow afternoon. I little thought then that I left it, never to return. We traveled very slowly all night, and did not get into Yarmouth before 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. I looked out for Mr. Burkiss, but he was not there, and instead of him a fat, short-winded, merry-looking little old man in black, with rusty little bunches of ribbons at the knees of his breeches, black stockings, and a broad-brimmed hat, came puffing up to the coach window, and said, "Master Copperfield?" "Yes, sir." "Will you come with me, young sir, if you please," he said, opening the door, "and I shall have the pleasure of taking you home." I put my hand in his, wondering who he was, and we walked away to a shop in a narrow street, on which was written Omer, draper, tailor, haberdasher, funeral furnisher, and C. It was a close and stifling little shop, full of all sorts of clothing, made and unmade, including one window full of beaver hats and bonnets. We went into a little back parlor behind the shop, where we found 3 young women at work on a quantity of black materials, which were heaped upon the table, and little bits and cuttings of which were littered all over the floor. There was a good fire in the room, and a breathless smell of warm black crepe. I did not know what the smell was then, but I know now. The 3 young women, who appeared to be very industrious and comfortable, raised their heads to look at me, and then went on with their work. Stitch, stitch, stitch. At the same time, there came from a workshop across a little yard outside the window a regular sound of hammering that kept a kind of tune, rat, tat, tat, rat, tat, tat, rat, tat, tat, without any variation. "Well," said my conductor to one of the 3 young women, "how do you get on, Minnie?" "We shall be ready by the trying on time," she replied gaily, without looking up. "Don't you be afraid, father." Mr. Omer took off his broad-brimmed hat and sat down and panted. He was so fat that he was obliged to pant some time before he could say, "That's right." "Father," said Minnie playfully, "what a porpoise you do grow." "Well, I don't know how it is, my dear," he replied, considering about it. "I am rather so." "You are such a comfortable man, you see," said Minnie. "You take things so easy." "No use taking him otherwise, my dear," said Mr. Omer. "No, indeed," returned his daughter. "We are all pretty gay here, thank heaven. Ain't we, father?" "I hope so, my dear," said Mr. Omer. "As I've got my breath now, I think I'll measure this young scholar. Would you walk in the shop, Master Copperfield?" I preceded Mr. Omer in compliance with his request, and after showing me a roll of cloth which he said was extra super and too good mourning for anything short of parents, he took my various dimensions and put them down in a book. While he was recording them, he called my attention to his stock in trade, and to certain fashions which he said had just come up, and to certain other fashions which he said had just gone out. "And by that sort of thing we very often lose a little mint of money," said Mr. Omer. "But fashions are like human beings. They come in, nobody knows when, why, or how. And they go out, nobody knows when, why, or how. Everything is like life, in my opinion, if you look at it in that point of view." I was too sorrowful to discuss the question, which would possibly have been beyond me under any circumstances, and Mr. Omer took me back into the parlor, breathing with some difficulty on the way. He then called down a little breakneck range of steps behind a door, "Bring up that tea and bread and butter," which after some time, during which I sat looking about me and thinking and listening to the stitching in the room and the tune that was being hammered across the yard, appeared on a tray and turned out to be for me. "I have been acquainted with you," said Mr. Omer, after watching me for some minutes. during which I had not made much impression on the breakfast, for the black things destroyed my appetite. "I have been acquainted with you a long time, my young friend." "Have you, sir?" "All your life," said Mr. Omer. "I may say before it. I knew your father before you. He was 5'9.5", and he lays in 25 foot of ground. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat across the yard. He lays in 25 foot of ground. If he lays in a fraction, said Mr. Omer pleasantly. It was either his request or her direction. I forget which. "Do you know how my little brother is, sir?" I inquired. Mr. Omer shook his head. Rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat, rat-tat-tat. "He is in his mother's arms," said he. "Oh, poor little fellow. Is he dead?" "Don't mind it more than you can help," said Mr. Omer. "Yes, the baby's dead." My wounds broke out afresh at this intelligence. I left this scarcely tasted breakfast and went and rested my head on another table, in a corner of the little room, which Minnie hastily cleared, lest I should spot the mourning that was lying there with my tears. She was a pretty, good-natured girl, and put my hair away from my eyes with a soft, kind touch, but she was very cheerful at having nearly finished her work and being in good time, and was so different from me. Presently the tune left off, and a good-looking young fellow came across the yard into the room. He had a hammer in his hand, and his mouth was full of little nails, which he was obliged to take out before he could speak. "Well, Joram," said Mr. Omer, "how do you get on?" "All right," said Joram. "Done, sir." Minnie colored a little, and the other two girls smiled at one another. "What? You were at it by candlelight last night, when I was at the club, then? Were you?" said Mr. Omer, shutting up one eye. "Yes," said Joram, "as you said we could make a little trip of it, and go over together, if it was done, Minnie and me, and you." "Oh, I thought you were going to leave me out altogether," said Mr. Omer, laughing till he coughed. "As you was so good as to say that," resumed the young man, "why I turned to with a will, you see. Will you give me your opinion of it?" "I will," said Mr. Omer, rising. "My dear," and he stopped and turned to me, "would you like to see your—" "No, father," Minnie interposed. "I thought it might be agreeable, my dear," said Mr. Omer. "But perhaps you're right. I can't say how I knew it was my dear, dear mother's coffin that they went to look at. I had never heard one making. I had never seen one that I know of. But it came into my mind what the noise was while it was going on, and when a young man entered, I am sure I knew what he had been doing." The work being now finished, the two girls, whose names I had not heard, brushed the shreds and threads from their dresses, and went into the shop to put that to rights and wait for customers. Minnie stayed behind to fold up what they had made and pack it in 2 baskets. This she did upon her knees, humming a lively little tune the while. Joram, who I had no doubt was her lover, came in and stole a kiss from her while she was busy. He didn't appear to mind me at all, and said her father was gone for the chaise, and he must make haste and get himself ready. Then he went out again, and then she put her thimble and scissors in her pocket, and stuck a needle threaded with black thread neatly in the bosom of her gown, and put on her outer clothing smartly at a little glass behind the door, in which I saw the reflection of her pleased face. All this I observed, sitting at the table in the corner with my head leaning on my hand, and my thoughts running on very different things. The chaise soon came round to the front of the shop, and the baskets being put in first, I was put in next, and those 3 followed. I remember it as a kind of half-chaise cart, half-pianoforte van, painted a somber color, and drawn by a black horse with a long tail. There was plenty of room for us all. I do not think I have ever experienced so strange a feeling in my life. I am wiser now, perhaps, as that of being with them, remembering how they had been employed, and seeing them enjoy the ride. I was not angry with them. I was more afraid of them, as if I were cast away among creatures with whom I had no community of nature. They were very cheerful. The old man sat in front to drive, and the 2 young people sat behind him, and whenever he spoke to them leaned forward, the one on one side of his chubby face and the other on the other, and made a great deal of him. They would have talked to me too, but I held back and moped in my corner, scared by their love-making and hilarity, though it was far from boisterous, and almost wondering that no judgment came upon them for their hardness of heart. So, when they stopped to bait the horse, and ate and drank and enjoyed themselves, I could touch nothing that they touched, but kept my fast unbroken. So, when we reached home, I dropped out of the chaise behind as quickly as possible that I might not be in their company before those solemn windows, looking blindly on me like closed eyes once bright. And oh, how little need I had had to think what would move me to tears when I came back, seeing the window of my mother's room, and next at that which in the better time was mine. I was in Peggotty's arms before I got to the door, and she took me into the house. Her grief burst out when she first saw me, but she controlled it soon, and spoke in whispers, and walked softly, as if the dead could be disturbed. She had not been in bed, I found, for a long time. She sat up at night still and watched. As long as her poor dear Pretty was above the ground, she said she would never desert her. Mr. Murdstone took no heed of me when I went into the parlor where he was, but sat by the fireside, weeping silently and pondering in his elbow chair. Miss Murdstone, who was busy at her writing desk, which was covered with letters and papers, gave me her cold fingernails and asked me, in an iron whisper, if I had been measured for my mourning. I said, yes. "And your shirts," said Miss Murdstone. "Have you brought him home?" "Yes, ma'am. I have brought home all my clothes." This was all the consolation that her firmness administered to me. I do not doubt that she had a choice pleasure in exhibiting what she called her self-command, and her firmness, and her strength of mind, and her common sense, and the whole diabolical catalogue of her unamiable qualities on such an occasion. She was particularly proud of her turn for business, and she showed it now in reducing everything to pen and ink and being moved by nothing. All the rest of that day, and from morning to night afterwards, she sat at that desk, scratching composedly with a hard pen, speaking in the same imperturbable whisper to everybody, never relaxing a muscle of her face, or softening a tone of her voice, or appearing with an atom of her dress astray. Her brother took a book sometimes, but never read it that I saw. He would open it and look at it as if he were reading, but would remain for a whole hour without turning the leaf, and then put it down and walk to and fro in the room. I used to sit with folded hands watching him and counting his footsteps hour after hour. He very seldom spoke to her, and never to me. He seemed to be the only restless thing, except the clocks, in the whole motionless house. In these days before the funeral, I saw but little of Peggotty, except that, in passing up or downstairs, I always found her close to the room where my mother and her baby lay, and except that she came to me every night and sat by my bed's head while I went to sleep. A day or two before the burial. I think it was a day or two before, but I am conscious of confusion in my mind about that heavy time, with nothing to mark its progress. She took me into the room. I only recollect that underneath some white covering on the bed, with a beautiful cleanliness and freshness all around it, there seemed to me to lie embodied the solemn stillness that was in the house, and that when she would have turned the cover gently back, I cried, "Oh no, oh no," and held her hand. If the funeral had been yesterday, I could not recollect it better. The very air of the best parlor, when I went in at the door, the bright condition of the fire, the shining of the wine in the decanters, the patterns of the glasses and plates, the faint sweet smell of cake, the odor of Miss Murdstone's dress, and our black clothes. Mr. Chillip is in the room, and comes to speak to me. "And how is Master David?" he says kindly. I cannot tell him very well. I give him my hand, which he holds in his. "Dear me," says Mr. Chillip, meekly smiling, with something shining in his eye. "Our little friends grow up around us. They grow out of our knowledge, ma'am." This is to Miss Murdstone, who makes no reply. "There is a great improvement here, ma'am," says Mr. Chillip. Miss Murdstone merely answers with a frown and a formal bend. Mr. Chillip, discomfited, goes into a corner, keeping me with him, and opens his mouth no more. I remark this, because I remark everything that happens, not because I care about myself, or have done since I came home. And now the bell begins to sound, and Mr. Omer and another come to make us ready. As Peggotty was wont to tell me, long ago, the followers of my father to the same grave were made ready in the same room. There are Mr. Murdstone, our neighbor Mr. Graper, Mr. Chillip, and I. When we go out to the door, the bearers and their load are in the garden, and they move before us down the path, and past the elms, and through the gate, and into the churchyard where I have so often heard the birds sing on a summer morning. We stand around the grave. The day seems different to me from every other day, and the light not of the same color, of a sadder color. Now there is a solemn hush, which we have brought from home with what is resting in the mold. And while we stand bareheaded, I hear the voice of the clergyman, sounding remote in the open air, and yet distinct and plain, saying, "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord." Then I hear sobs, and, standing apart among the lookers-on, I see that good and faithful servant, whom of all the people upon earth I love the best, and unto whom my childish heart is certain that the Lord will one day say, "Well done." There are many faces that I know among the little crowd, faces that I knew in church, when mine was always wandering there, faces that first saw my mother when she came to the village in her youthful bloom. I do not mind them. I mind nothing but my grief, and yet I see and know them all, and even in the background, far away, see Minnie looking on, and her eye glancing on her sweetheart, who is near me. It is over, and the earth is filled in, and we turn to come away. Before us stands our house, so pretty and unchanged, so linked in my mind with the young idea of what is gone, that all my sorrow has been nothing to the sorrow it calls forth. But they take me on, and Mr. Chillip talks to me, and when we get home, puts some water to my lips, and when I ask his leave to go up to my room, dismisses me with the gentleness of a woman. All this, I say, is yesterday's event. Events of later date have floated from me to the shore where all forgotten things will reappear, but this stands like a high rock in the ocean. I knew that Peggotty would come to me in my room. The Sabbath stillness of the time, the day was so like Sunday, I have forgotten that, was suited to us both. She sat down by my side upon my little bed, and holding my hand, and sometimes putting it to her lips, and sometimes smoothing it with hers, as she might have comforted my little brother, told me, in her way, all that she had to tell concerning what had happened. She was never well, said Peggotty, for a long time. She was uncertain in her mind, and not happy. When her baby was born, I thought at first she would get better, but she was more delicate and sunk a little every day. She used to like to sit alone before her baby came, and then she cried, but afterwards she used to sing to it, so soft that I once thought when I heard her it was like a voice up in the air that was rising away. I think she got to be more timid and more frightened-like of late, and that a hard word was like a blow to her. But she was always the same to me. She never changed to her foolish Peggotty, didn't my sweet girl. Here Peggotty stopped and softly beat upon my hand a little while. The last time that I saw her like her own old self was the night when you came home, my dear. The day you went away, she said to me, "I never shall see my pretty darling again." Something tells me so, that tells the truth, I know. She tried to hold up after that, and many a time, when they told her she was thoughtless and light-hearted, made believe to be so, but it was all a bygone then. She never told her husband what she had told me. She was afraid of saying it to anybody else, till one night, a little more than a week before it happened, when she said to him, "My dear, I think I am dying. It's off my mind now, Peggotty," she told me, when I laid her in her bed that night. He will believe it more and more, poor fellow, every day for a few days to come, and then it will be past. I'm very tired. If this is sleep, sit by me while I sleep. Don't leave me. God bless both my children. God protect and keep my fatherless boy. I never left her afterwards, said Peggotty. She often talked to them too downstairs, for she loved them. She couldn't bear not to love anyone who was about her. But when they went away from her bedside, she always turned to me, as if there was rest where Peggotty was, and never fell asleep in any other way. On the last night, in the evening, she kissed me and said, "If my baby should die too, Peggotty, please let them lay him in my arms and bury us together." It was done, for the poor lamb lived but a day beyond her. "Let my dearest boy go with us to our resting place," she said, "and tell him that his mother, when she lay here, blessed him not once, but 1,000 times." Another silence followed this, and another gentle beating on my hand. "It was pretty far in the night," said Peggotty, when she asked me for some drink, and when she had taken it, gave me such a patient smile. The dear! So beautiful! Daybreak had come, and the sun was rising, when she said to me, how kind and considerate Mr. Copperfield had always been to her, and how he had borne with her, and told her, when she doubted herself, that a loving heart was better and stronger than wisdom, and that he was a happy man in hers. "Peggotty, my dear," she said then, "put me nearer to you," for she was very weak. "Lay your good arm underneath my neck," she said, "and turn me to you, for your face is going far off, and I want it to be near." I put as she asked, and, oh, Davy, the time had come when my first parting words to you were true, when she was glad to lay her poor head on her stupid, cross, old Peggotty's arm, and she died like a child that had gone to sleep. Thus ended Peggotty's narration. From a moment of my knowing of the death of my mother, the idea of her, as she had been of late, had vanished from me. I remembered her from that instant only as the young mother of my earliest impressions, who had been used to wind her bright curls round and round her finger and to dance with me at twilight in the parlor. What Peggotty had told me now was so far from bringing me back to the later period that it rooted the earlier image in my mind. It may be curious, but it is true. In her death, she winged her way back to her calm, untroubled youth, and canceled all the rest. The mother who lay in the grave was the mother of my infancy. The little creature in her arms was myself, as I had once been, hushed forever on her bosom. Chapter 10. I become neglected, and A.M. provided for. The first act of business Miss Murdstone performed when the day of the solemnity was over, and light was freely admitted into the house, was to give Peggotty a month's warning. Much as Peggotty would have disliked such a service, I believe she would have retained it, for my sake, in preference to the best upon earth. She told me we must part, and told me why, and we condoled with one another in all sincerity. As to me or my future, not a word was said or step taken. Happy they would have been, I dare say, if they could have dismissed me at a month's warning too. I mustered courage once to ask Miss Murdstone when I was going back to school, and she answered dryly she believed I was not going back at all. I was told nothing more. I was very anxious to know what was going to be done with me, and so was Peggotty, but neither she nor I could pick up any information on the subject. There was one change in my condition, which, while it relieved me of a great deal of present uneasiness, might have made me, if I had been capable of considering it closely, yet more uncomfortable about the future. It was this: the constraint that had been put upon me was quite abandoned. I was so far from being required to keep my dull post in the parlor that on several occasions, when I took my seat there, Miss Murdstone frowned at me to go away. I was so far from being warned off from Peggotty's society that, provided I was not in Mr. Murdstone's, I was never sought out or inquired for. At first, I was in daily dread of his taking my education in hand again, or of Miss Murdstone's devoting herself to it. But I soon began to think that such fears were groundless, and that all I had to anticipate was neglect. I do not conceive that this discovery gave me much pain then. I was still giddy with the shock of my mother's death, and in a kind of stunned state as to all tributary things. I can recollect, indeed, to have speculated at odd times on the possibility of my not being taught any more or cared for any more, and growing up to be a shabby, moody man, lounging an idle life away about the village, as well as on the feasibility of my getting rid of this picture by going away somewhere, like the hero in a story, to seek my fortune. But these were transient visions, daydreams I sat looking at sometimes as if they were faintly painted or written on the wall of my room, and which, as they melted away, left the wall blank again. "Peggotty," I said in a thoughtful whisper one evening, when I was warming my hands at the kitchen fire, "Mr. Murdstone likes me less than he used to. He never liked me much, Peggotty, but he would rather not even see me now, if he can help it." "Perhaps it's his sorrow," said Peggotty, stroking my hair. "I'm sure, Peggotty, I am sorry too. If I believe it was his sorrow, I should not think of it at all. But it's not that. Oh no, it's not that." "How do you know it's not that?" said Peggotty, after a silence. "Oh, his sorrow is another and quite a different thing. He is sorry at this moment, sitting by the fireside with Miss Murdstone. But if I was to go in, Peggotty, he would be something besides." "What would he be?" said Peggotty. "Angry," I answered, with an involuntary imitation of his dark frown. If he was only sorry, he wouldn't look at me as he does. I'm only sorry, and it makes me feel kinder. Peggotty said nothing for a little while, and I warmed my hands, as silent as she. Davy, she said at length. Yes, Peggotty, I have tried, my dear, all ways I could think of, all the ways there are, and all the ways there ain't, in short, to get a suitable service here in Blunderstone. But there's no such a thing, my love. And what do you mean to do? Peggotty, says I wistfully. Do you mean to go and seek your fortune? I expect I shall be forced to go to Yarmouth, replied Peggotty, and live there. You might have gone farther off, I said, brightening a little, and been as bad as lost. I shall see you sometimes, my dear old Peggotty there. You won't be quite at the other end of the world, will you? Contrary ways, please God, cried Peggotty with great animation. As long as you are here, my pet, I shall come over every week of my life to see you. One day, every week of my life. I felt a great weight taken off my mind by this promise. But even this was not all, for Peggotty went on to say, I'm going, Davy, you see, to my brother's first for another fortnight's visit, just till I have had time to look about me and get to be something like myself again. Now, I've been thinking that perhaps, as they don't want you here at present, you might be let to go along with me. If anything, short of being in a different relation to everyone about me, Peggotty accepted, could have given me a sense of pleasure at that time, it would have been this project of all others. The idea of being again surrounded by those honest faces shining welcome on me, of renewing the peacefulness of the sweet Sunday morning, when the bells were ringing, the stones dropping in the water, and the shadowy ships breaking through the mist, of roaming up and down with little Emily, telling her my troubles, and finding charms against them in the shells and pebbles on the beach, made a calm in my heart. It was ruffled next moment, to be sure, by a doubt of Miss Murdstone's giving her consent, but even that was set at rest soon, for she came out to take an evening grope in the store-closet while we were yet in conversation, and Peggotty, with a boldness that amazed me, broached the topic on the spot. The boy will be idle there, said Miss Murdstone, looking into a pickle jar, and idleness is the root of all evil. But, to be sure, he would be idle here or anywhere, in my opinion. Peggotty had an angry answer ready, I could see, but she swallowed it for my sake and remained silent. Humph, said Miss Murdstone, still keeping her eye on the pickles. It is of more importance than anything else. It is of paramount importance that my brother should not be disturbed or made uncomfortable. I suppose I had better say yes. I thanked her, without making any demonstration of joy, lest it should induce her to withdraw her assent. Nor could I help thinking this a prudent course, since she looked at me out of the pickle jar, with as great an access of sourness as if her black eyes had absorbed its contents. However, the permission was given, and was never retracted, for when the month was out, Peggotty and I were ready to depart. Mr. Burkiss came into the house for Peggotty's boxes. I had never known him to pass the garden gate before, but on this occasion he came into the house, and he gave me a look as he shouldered the largest box and went out, which I thought had meaning in it, if meaning could ever be said to find its way into Mr. Burkiss's visage. Peggotty was naturally in low spirits at leaving what had been her home so many years, and where the two strong attachments of her life for my mother and myself had been formed. She had been walking in the churchyard, too, very early, and she got into the cart and sat in it with her handkerchief at her eyes. So long as she remained in this condition, Mr. Burkiss gave no sign of life whatever. He sat in his usual place and attitude like a great stuffed figure. But when she began to look about her and to speak to me, he nodded his head and grinned several times. I have not the least notion at whom or what he meant by it. It's a beautiful day, Mr. Burkiss, I said, as an act of politeness. It ain't bad, said Mr. Burkiss, who generally qualified his speech and rarely committed himself. Peggotty is quite comfortable now, Mr. Burkiss, I remarked for his satisfaction. Is she, though? Said Mr. Burkiss. After reflecting about it, with a sagacious air, Mr. Burkiss eyed her and said, Are you pretty comfortable? Peggotty laughed and answered in the affirmative. But really and truly, you know. Are you? Growled Mr. Burkiss, sliding nearer to her on the seat and nudging her with his elbow. Are you really and truly pretty comfortable? Are you? Yeah. At each of these inquiries, Mr. Burkiss shuffled nearer to her and gave her another nudge, so that at last we were all crowded together in the left-hand corner of the cart, and I was so squeezed that I could hardly bear it. Peggotty calling his attention to my sufferings, Mr. Burkiss gave me a little more room at once and got away by degrees. But I could not help observing that he seemed to think he had hit upon a wonderful expedient for expressing himself in a neat, agreeable, and pointed manner, without the inconvenience of inventing conversation. He manifestly chuckled over it for some time. By and by he turned to Peggotty again, and repeating, "Are you pretty comfortable, though?" bore down upon us as before, until the breath was nearly edged out of my body. By and by he made another descent upon us with the same inquiry, and the same result. At length, I got up whenever I saw him coming, and standing on the footboard, pretended to look at the prospect, after which I did very well. He was so polite as to stop at a public house, expressly on our account, and entertain us with broiled mutton and beer. Even when Peggotty was in the act of drinking, he was seized with one of those approaches, and almost choked her. But as we drew nearer to the end of our journey, he had more to do and less time for gallantry. And when we got on Yarmouth pavement, we were all too much shaken and jolted, I apprehend, to have any leisure for anything else. Mr. Peggotty and Ham waited for us at the old place. They received me and Peggotty in an affectionate manner, and shook hands with Mr. Burkiss, who, with his hat on the very back of his head, and a shamefaced leer upon his countenance, and pervading his very legs, presented but a vacant appearance, I thought. They each took one of Peggotty's trunks, and we were going away, when Mr. Burkiss solemnly made a sign to me with his forefinger to come under an archway. "I say," growled Mr. Burkiss, "it was all right." I looked up into his face, and answered with an attempt to be very profound. "Oh, it didn't come to an end there," said Mr. Burkiss, nodding confidentially. "It was all right." Again I answered, "Oh, you know who was willing," said my friend. "It was Burkiss, and Burkiss only." I nodded assent. "It's all right," said Mr. Burkiss, shaking hands. "I'm a friend of your end. You made it all right first. It's all right." In his attempts to be particularly lucid, Mr. Burkiss was so extremely mysterious that I might have stood looking in his face for an hour, and most assuredly should have got as much information out of it as out of the face of a clock that had stopped, but for Peggotty's calling me away. As we were going along, she asked me what he had said, and I told her he had said it was all right. "Like his impudence," said Peggotty, "but I don't mind that. Davy dear, what should you think if I was to think of being married?" "Why, I suppose you would like me as much then, Peggotty, as you do now." I returned, after a little consideration, greatly to the astonishment of the passengers in the street, as well as of her relations going on before. The good soul was obliged to stop and embrace me on the spot, with many protestations of her unalterable love. "Tell me, what should you say, darling?" she asked again, when this was over, and we were walking on. "If you were thinking of being married to Mr. Burkiss, Peggotty?" "Yes," said Peggotty. "I should think it would be a very good thing. For then, you know, Peggotty, you would always have the horse and cart to bring you over to see me, and could come for nothing and be sure of coming." "The sense of a dear!" cried Peggotty. "Why, I've been thinking of this month back." "Yes, my precious, and I think I should be more independent altogether, you see, let alone my working with a better heart in my own house than I could in anybody else's now. I don't know what I might be fit for, now, as a servant to a stranger. And I shall be always near my pretty's resting place," said Peggotty, musing, "and be able to see it when I like. And when I lie down to rest, I may be laid not far off from my darling girl." We neither of us said anything for a little while. "But I wouldn't so much as give it another thought," said Peggotty, cheerily, "if my Davy was anyways against it. Not if I had been asked in church 30 times, 3 times over, and was wearing out the ring in my pocket." "Look at me, Peggotty," I replied, "and see if I am not really glad, and don't truly wish it, as indeed I did with all my heart." "Well, my life," said Peggotty, giving me a squeeze, "I have thought of it night and day, every way I can, and I hope the right way, but I'll think of it again, and speak to my brother about it, And in the meantime, we'll keep it to ourselves, Davy, you, and me. Burkiss is a good plain creature, said Peggotty, and if I try to do my duty by him, I think it would be my fault if I wasn't. If I wasn't pretty comfortable, said Peggotty, laughing heartily. This quotation from Mr. Burkiss was so appropriate, and tickled us both so much that we laughed again and again, and were quite in a pleasant humor when we came within view of Mr. Peggotty's cottage. It looked just the same, except that it may, perhaps, have shrunk a little in my eyes, and Mrs. Gummidge was waiting at the door as if she had stood there ever since. All within was the same, down to the seaweed in the balloon mug in my bedroom. I went into the outhouse to look about me, and the very same lobsters, crabs, and crawfish possessed by the same desire to pinch the world in general appear to be in the same state of conglomeration in the same old corner. But there was no little Emily to be seen, so I asked Mr. Peggotty where she was. "She's at school, sir," said Mr. Peggotty, wiping the heat consequent on the porterage of Peggotty's box from his forehead. "She'll be home," looking at the Dutch clock, "in from 20 minutes to half an hour's time. We all on us feel the loss of her, bless ye." Mrs. Gummidge moaned. "Cheer up, mother," cried Mr. Peggotty. "I feel it more than anybody else," said Mrs. Gummidge. "I'm a lone lorn creetur, and she used to be a'most the only thing that didn't go contrary with me." Mrs. Gummidge, whimpering and shaking her head, applied herself to blowing the fire. Mr. Peggotty, looking round upon us while she was so engaged, said in a low voice, which he shaded with his hand, "The old un." From this I rightly conjectured that no improvement had taken place since my last visit in the state of Mrs. Gummidge's spirits. Now, the whole place was, or it should have been, quite as delightful a place as ever, and yet it did not impress me in the same way. I felt rather disappointed with it. Perhaps it was because little Emily was not at home. I knew the way by which she would come, and presently found myself strolling along the path to meet her. A figure appeared in the distance before long, and I soon knew it to be Emily, who was a little creature still in stature, though she was grown. But when she drew nearer, and I saw her blue eyes looking bluer, and her dimpled face looking brighter, and her whole self prettier and gayer, a curious feeling came over me that made me pretend not to know her, and pass by, as if I were looking at something a long way off. I have done such a thing since in later life, or I am mistaken. Little Emily didn't care a bit. She saw me well enough, but instead of turning round and calling after me, ran away laughing. This obliged me to run after her, and she ran so fast that we were very near the cottage before I caught her. "Oh, it's you, is it?" said little Emily. "Why, you knew who it was, Emily," said I. "And didn't you know who it was?" said Emily. I was going to kiss her, but she covered her cherry lips with her hands, and said she wasn't a baby now, and ran away, laughing more than ever, into the house. She seemed to delight in teasing me, which was a change in her. I wondered at very much. The tea-table was ready, and our little locker was put out in its old place, but instead of coming to sit by me, she went and bestowed her company upon that grumbling Mrs. Gummidge, and on Mr. Peggotty's inquiring why, rumpled her hair all over her face to hide it, and could do nothing but laugh. "A little puss, it is," said Mr. Peggotty, patting her with his great hand. "So SH's, so SH's," cried Ham. "Mossar Davy bore, so SH's." And he sat and chuckled at her for some time, in a state of mingled admiration and delight that made his face a burning red. Little Emily was spoiled by them all, in fact, and by no one more than Mr. Peggotty himself, whom she could have coaxed into anything by only going and laying her cheek against his rough whisker. That was my opinion, at least when I saw her do it, and I held Mr. Peggotty to be thoroughly in the right. But she was so affectionate and sweet-natured, and had such a pleasant manner of being both sly and shy at once, that she captivated me more than ever. She was tender-hearted, too, for when, as we sat round the fire after tea, an allusion was made by Mr. Peggotty over his pipe to the loss I had sustained, the tears stood in her eyes, and she looked at me so kindly across the table that I felt quite thankful to her. "Ah," said Mr. Peggotty, taking up her curls and running them over his hand like water, "here's another orphan, you see, sir. And here," said Mr. Peggotty, giving Ham a backhanded knock in the chest, "is another of 'em, though he don't look much like it. If I had you for my guardian, Mr. Peggotty, said I, shaking my head. I don't think I should feel much like it. Well said, Moss R. Davy Bore, cried Ham in an ecstasy. Hurrah! Well said. Nor more you wouldn't. Whore! Whore! Here he returned Mr. Peggotty's backhander, and little Emily got up and kissed Mr. Peggotty. And how's your friend, sir? Said Mr. Peggotty to me. Steerforth, said I. That's the name, cried Mr. Peggotty, turning to Ham. I knowed it was something in our way. You said it was Rutherford, observed Ham, laughing. Well, retorted Mr. Peggotty, and ye steer with a rudder, don't ye? It ain't fur off. How is he, sir? He was very well indeed when I came away, Mr. Peggotty. There's a friend, said Mr. Peggotty, stretching out his pipe. There's a friend, if you talk of friends. Why, Lord love my heart alive, if it ain't a treat to look at him. He is very handsome, is he not? Said I, my heart warming with this praise. Handsome, cried Mr. Peggotty. He stands up to you why I don't know what he don't stand up to you like. He's so bold. Yes, that's just his character, said I. He's as brave as a lion, and you can't think how frank he is, Mr. Peggotty. And I do suppose now, said Mr. Peggotty, looking at me through the smoke of his pipe, that in the way of book larning he'd take the wind out of a'most anything. Yes, said I, delighted. He knows everything. He is astonishingly clever. There's a friend, murmured Mr. Peggotty, with a grave toss of his head. Nothing seems to cost him any trouble, said I. He knows a task if he only looks at it. He is the best cricketer you ever saw. He will give you almost as many men as you like at draughts, and beat you easily. Mr. Peggotty gave his head another toss, as much as to say, of course he will. He is such a speaker, I pursued, that he can win anybody over, and I don't know what you'd say if you were to hear him sing, Mr. Peggotty. Mr. Peggotty gave his head another toss, as much as to say, I have no doubt of it. Then he's such a generous, fine, noble fellow, said I, quite carried away by my favorite theme, that it's hardly possible to give him as much praise as he deserves. I am sure I can never feel thankful enough for the generosity with which he has protected me, so much younger and lower in the school than himself. I was running on, very fast indeed, when my eyes rested on little Emily's face, which was bent forward over the table, listening with the deepest attention, her breath held, her blue eyes sparkling like jewels, and the color mantling in her cheeks. She looked so extraordinarily earnest and pretty that I stopped in a sort of wonder, and they all observed her at the same time, for as I stopped, they laughed and looked at her. Emily is like me, said Peggotty, and would like to see him. Emily was confused by our all observing her, and hung down her head, and her face was covered with blushes. Glancing up presently through her stray curls, and seeing that we were all looking at her still, I am sure I, for one, could have looked at her for hours, she ran away, and kept away till it was nearly bedtime. I lay down in the old little bed in the stern of the boat, and the wind came moaning on across the flat as it had done before. But I could not help fancying, now, that it moaned of those who were gone, and instead of thinking that the sea might rise in the night and float the boat away, I thought of the sea that had risen since I last heard those sounds and drowned my happy home. I recollect, as the wind and water began to sound fainter in my ears, putting a short clause into my prayers, petitioning that I might grow up to marry little Emily, and so dropping lovingly asleep. The days passed pretty much as they had passed before, except, it was a great exception, that little Emily and I seldom wandered on the beach now. She had tasks to learn and needlework to do, and was absent during a great part of each day. But I felt that we should not have had those old wanderings, even if it had been otherwise. Wild and full of childish whims as Emily was, she was more of a little woman than I had supposed. She seemed to have got a great distance away from me in little more than a year. She liked me, but she laughed at me and tormented me, and when I went to meet her, stole home another way, and was laughing at the door when I came back, disappointed. The best times were when she sat quietly at work in the doorway, and I sat on the wooden step at her feet, reading to her. It seems to me at this hour that I have never seen such sunlight as on those bright April afternoons, that I have never seen such a sunny little figure as I used to see, sitting in the doorway of the old boat, that I have never beheld such sky, such water, such glorified ships sailing away into golden air. On the very first evening after our arrival, Mr. Burkiss appeared in an exceedingly vacant and awkward condition, and with a bundle of oranges tied up in a handkerchief. As he made no allusion of any kind to this property, he was supposed to have left it behind him by accident when he went away, until Ham, running after him to restore it, came back with the information that it was intended for Peggotty. After that occasion, he appeared every evening at exactly the same hour, and always with a little bundle, to which he never alluded, and which he regularly put behind the door and left there. These offerings of affection were of a most various and eccentric description. Among them I remember a double set of pig schrotters, a huge pincushion, half a bushel or so of apples, a pair of jet earrings, some Spanish onions, a box of dominoes, a canary bird in cage, and a leg of pickled pork. Mr. Burkiss's wooing, as I remember it, was altogether of a peculiar kind. He very seldom said anything, but would sit by the fire in much the same attitude as he sat in his cart, and stare heavily at Peggotty, who was opposite. One night, being, as I suppose, inspired by love, he made a dart at the bit of wax candle she kept for her thread, and put it in his waistcoat pocket and carried it off. After that, his great delight was to produce it when it was wanted, sticking to the lining of his pocket in a partially melted state, and pocket it again when it was done with. He seemed to enjoy himself very much, and not to feel at all called upon to talk. Even when he took Peggotty out for a walk on the flats, he had no uneasiness on that head, I believe, contenting himself with now and then asking her if she was pretty comfortable. And I remember that sometimes, after he was gone, Peggotty would throw her apron over her face and laugh for half an hour. Indeed, we were all more or less amused, except that miserable Mrs. Gummidge, whose courtship would appear to have been of an exactly parallel nature. She was so continually reminded by these transactions of the old one. At length, when the term of my visit was nearly expired, it was given out that Peggotty and Mr. Burkiss were going to make a day's holiday together, and that little Emily and I were to accompany them. I had but a broken sleep the night before, in anticipation of the pleasure of a whole day with Emily. We were all astir betimes in the morning, and while we were yet at breakfast, Mr. Burkiss appeared in the distance, driving a chaise cart towards the object of his affections. Peggotty was dressed, as usual, in her neat and quiet mourning, but Mr. Burkiss bloomed in a new blue coat, of which the tailor had given him such good measure, that the cuffs would have rendered gloves unnecessary in the coldest weather, while the collar was so high that it pushed his hair up on end on the top of his head. His bright buttons, too, were of the largest size. Rendered complete by drab pantaloons and a buff waistcoat, I thought Mr. Burkiss a phenomenon of respectability. When we were all in a bustle outside the door, I found that Mr. Peggotty was prepared with an old shoe, which was to be thrown after us for luck, and which he offered to Mrs. Gummidge for that purpose. "No, it had better be done by somebody else, Daniel," said Mrs. Gummidge. "I'm a lone creetur myself, and everything that reminds me of creeturs that ain't lone and lorn goes contrary with me." "Come, old gal," cried Mr. Peggotty, "take and heave it." "No, Daniel," returned Mrs. Gummidge, whimpering and shaking her head. "If I felt less, I could do more. You don't feel like me, Daniel. Things don't go contrary with you, nor you with them. You had better do it yourself." But here Peggotty, who had been going about from one to another in a hurried way, kissing everybody, called out from the cart, in which we all were by this time, Emily and I on two little chairs side by side, that Mrs. Gummidge must do it. So Mrs. Gummidge did it, and, I am sorry to relate, cast a damp upon the festive character of our departure by immediately bursting into tears and sinking subdued into the arms of Ham, with the declaration that she knowed she was a burden and had better be carried to the house at once, which I really thought was a sensible idea that Ham might have acted on. Away we went, however, on our holiday excursion, and the first thing we did was to stop at a church, where Mr. Burkiss tied the horse to some rails and went in with Peggotty, leaving little Emily and me alone in the chaise. I took that occasion to put my arm round Emily's waist, and proposed that as I was going away so very soon now, we should determine to be very affectionate to one another, and very happy, all day. Little Emily consenting, and allowing me to kiss her, I became desperate. Informing her, I recollect, that I never could love another, and that I was prepared to shed the blood of anybody who should aspire to her affections. How merry little Emily made herself about it! With what a demure assumption of being immensely older and wiser than I. The fairy little woman said I was a silly boy, and then laughed so charmingly that I forgot the pain of being called by that disparaging name, in the pleasure of looking at her. Mr. Burkiss and Peggotty were a good while in the church, but came out at last, and then we drove away into the country. As we were going along, Mr. Burkiss turned to me and said, with a wink, by the by, I should hardly have thought before that he could wink. What name was it as I rode up in the cart? Clara Peggotty, I answered. What name would it be as I should ride up now, if there was a tilt here? Clara Peggotty, again, I suggested. Clara Peggotty Burkiss, he returned, and burst into a roar of laughter that shook the chaise. In a word, they were married, and had gone into the church for no other purpose. Peggotty was resolved that it should be quietly done, and the clerk had given her away, and there had been no witnesses of the ceremony. She was a little confused when Mr. Burkiss made this abrupt announcement of their union, and could not hug me enough in token of her unimpaired affection. But she soon became herself again, and said she was very glad it was over. We drove to a little inn in a by-road, where we were expected, and where we had a very comfortable dinner, and passed the day with great satisfaction. If Peggotty had been married every day for the last 10 years, she could hardly have been more at her ease about it. It made no sort of difference in her. She was just the same as ever, and went out for a stroll with little Emily and me before tea, while Mr. Burkiss philosophically smoked his pipe and enjoyed himself, I suppose, with the contemplation of his happiness. If so, it sharpened his appetite, for I distinctly called to mind that, although he had eaten a good deal of pork and greens at dinner, and had finished off with a fowl or two, he was obliged to have cold boiled bacon for tea, and disposed of a large quantity without any emotion. I have often thought since what an odd, innocent, out-of-the-way kind of wedding it must have been. We got into the chaise again soon after dark, and drove cozily back, looking up at the stars and talking about them. I was their chief exponent, and opened Mr. Burkiss's mind to an amazing extent. I told him all I knew, but he would have believed anything I might have taken it into my head to impart to him, for he had a profound veneration for my abilities, and informed his wife in my hearing on that very occasion that I was a young Rochus, by which I think he meant prodigy. When we had exhausted the subject of the stars, or rather when I had exhausted the mental faculties of Mr. Burkiss, little Emily and I made a cloak of an old wrapper, and sat under it for the rest of the journey. Ah, how I loved her! What happiness, I thought, if we were married, and were going away anywhere to live among the trees and in the fields, never growing older, never growing wiser, children ever, rambling hand in hand through sunshine and among flowery meadows, laying down our heads on moss at night, in a sweet sleep of purity and peace, and buried by the birds when we were dead. Some such picture, with no real world in it, bright with the light of our innocence, and vague as the stars afar off, was in my mind all the way. I'm glad to think there were two such guileless hearts at Peggotty's marriage as little Emily's and mine. I am glad to think the Loves and Graces took such airy forms in its homely procession. Well, we came to the old boat again in good time at night, and their Mr. and Mrs. Burkiss bade us good-bye, and drove away snugly to their own home. I felt then, for the first time, that I had lost Peggotty. I should have gone to bed with a sore heart indeed under any other roof but that which sheltered little Emily's head. Mr. Peggotty and him knew what was in my thoughts as well as I did, and were ready with some supper and their hospitable faces to drive it away. Little Emily came and sat beside me on the locker for the only time in all that visit, and it was altogether a wonderful close to a wonderful day. It was a night tide, and soon after we went to bed, Mr. Peggotty and Ham went out to fish. I felt very brave at being left alone in the solitary house, the protector of Emily and Mrs. Gummidge, and only wished that a lion or a serpent or any ill-disposed monster would make an attack upon us that I might destroy him and cover myself with glory. But as nothing of the sort happened to be walking about on Yarmouth Flats that night, I provided the best substitute I could by dreaming of dragons until morning. With morning came Peggotty, who called to me, as usual, under my window, as if Mr. Burkiss the carrier had been from first to last a dream too. After breakfast, she took me to her own home, and a beautiful little home it was. Of all the movables in it, I must have been impressed by a certain old bureau of some dark wood in the parlor. The tile-floored kitchen was the general sitting room, with a retreating top which opened, let down, and became a desk, within which was a large quarto edition of Fox's Book of Martyrs. This precious volume, of which I do not recollect one word, I immediately discovered and immediately applied myself to, and I never visited the house afterwards, but I kneeled on a chair, opened the casket where this gem was enshrined, spread my arms over the desk, and fell to devouring the book afresh. I was chiefly edified, I am afraid, by the pictures, which were numerous and represented all kinds of dismal horrors. But the martyrs in Peggotty's house have been inseparable in my mind ever since, and are now. I took leave of Mr. Peggotty and Ham and Mrs. Gummidge and little Emily that day, and passed the night at Peggotty's in a little room in the roof, with a crocodile book on a shelf by the bed's head, which was to be always mine, Peggotty said, and should always be kept for me in exactly the same state. Young or old, Davy dear, as long as I am alive and have this house over my head, said Peggotty, you shall find it as if I expected you here directly minute. I shall keep it every day, as I used to keep your old little room, my darling. And if you was to go to China, you might think of it as being kept just the same all the time you were away. I felt the truth and constancy of my dear old nurse, with all my heart, and thanked her as well as I could. That was not very well, for she spoke to me thus, with her arms round my neck, in the morning, and I was going home in the morning, and I went home in the morning with herself and Mr. Burkiss in the cart. They left me at the gate, not easily or lightly, and it was a strange sight to me to see the cart go on, taking Peggotty away, and leaving me under the old elm trees looking at the house, in which there was no face to look on mine with love or liking any more. And now I fell into a state of neglect, which I cannot look back upon without compassion. I fell at once into a solitary condition, apart from all friendly notice, apart from the society of all other boys of my own age, apart from all companionship but my own spiritless thoughts, which seems to cast its gloom upon this paper as I write. What would I have given to have been sent to the hardest school that ever was kept, to have been taught something anyhow, anywhere? No such hope dawned upon me. They disliked me, and they sullenly, sternly, steadily overlooked me. I think Mr. Murdstone's means were straitened at about this time, but it is little to the purpose. He could not bear me, and in putting me from him he tried, as I believe, to put away the notion that I had any claim upon him, and succeeded. I was not actively ill-used. I was not beaten or starved, but the wrong that was done to me had no intervals of relenting, and was done in a systematic, passionless manner. Day after day, week after week, month after month, I was coldly neglected. I wonder sometimes, when I think of it, what they would have done if I had been taken with an illness, whether I should have lain down in my lonely room and languished through it in my usual solitary way, or whether anybody would have helped me out. When Mr. and Miss Murdstone were at home, I took my meals with them. In their absence, I ate and drank by myself. At all times I lounged about the house and neighborhood quite disregarded, except that they were jealous of my making any friends, thinking, perhaps, that if I did, I might complain to someone. For this reason, though Mr. Chillip often asked me to go and see him, he was a widower, having, some years before that, lost a little small light-haired wife, whom I can just remember connecting in my own thoughts with a pale tortoise-shell cat. It was but seldom that I enjoyed the happiness of passing an afternoon in his closet of surgery, reading some book that was new to me, with the smell of the whole pharmacopoeia coming up my nose, or pounding something in a mortar under his mild directions. For the same reason, added no doubt to the old dislike of her, I was seldom allowed to visit Peggotty. Faithful to her promise, she either came to see me, or met me somewhere near, once every week, and never empty-handed, but many and bitter were the disappointments I had in being refused permission to pay a visit to her at her house. Some few times, however, at long intervals, I was allowed to go there. And then I found out that Mr. Burkiss was something of a miser, or, as Peggotty dutifully expressed it, was a little near and kept a heap of money in a box under his bed, which he pretended was only full of coats and trousers. In this coffer, his riches hid themselves with such a tenacious modesty that the smallest installments could only be tempted out by artifice, so that Peggotty had to prepare a long and elaborate scheme, a very gunpowder plot, for every Saturday's expenses. All this time I was so conscious of the waste of any promise I had given, and of my being utterly neglected, that I should have been perfectly miserable, I have no doubt, but for the old books. They were my only comfort, and I was as true to them as they were to me, and read them over and over I don't know how many times more. I now approach a period of my life, which I can never lose the remembrance of, while I remember anything, and the recollection of which has often, without my invocation, come before me like a ghost, and haunted happier times. I had been out, one day, loitering somewhere, in the listless, meditative manner that my way of life engendered, when, turning the corner of a lane near our house, I came upon Mr. Murdstone walking with a gentleman. I was confused, and was going by them, when the gentleman cried, "What, Brooks?" "No, sir, David Copperfield," I said. "Don't tell me." "You are Brooks," said the gentleman. "You are Brooks of Sheffield. That's your name." At these words, I observed the gentleman more attentively. His laugh coming to my remembrance too, I knew him to be Mr. Quinion, whom I had gone over to Lowestoft with Mr. Murdstone to see before. It is no matter, I need not recall when. "And how do you get on, and where are you being educated, Brooks?" said Mr. Quinion. He had put his hand upon my shoulder, and turned me about to walk with them. I did not know what to reply, and glanced dubiously at Mr. Murdstone. "He is at home at present," said the latter. "He is not being educated anywhere. I don't know what to do with him. He is a difficult subject." That old double look was on me for a moment, and then his eyes darkened with a frown as it turned, in its aversion, elsewhere. "Humph," said Mr. Quinion, looking at us both, I thought. "Fine weather." Silence ensued, and I was considering how I could best disengage my shoulder from his hand and go away, when he said, "I suppose you're a pretty sharp fellow still?" Brooks." "Aye, he is sharp enough," said Mr. Murdstone, impatiently. "You had better let him go. He will not thank you for troubling him." On this hint, Mr. Quinion released me, and I made the best of my way home. Looking back as I turned into the front garden, I saw Mr. Murdstone leaning against the wicket of the churchyard, and Mr. Quinion talking to him. They were both looking after me, and I felt that they were speaking of me. Mr. Quinion lay at our house that night. After breakfast, the next morning, I had put my chair away and was going out of the room when Mr. Murdstone called me back. He then gravely repaired to another table, where his sister sat herself at her desk. Mr. Quinion, with his hands in his pockets, stood looking out of window, and I stood looking at them all. "David," said Mr. Murdstone, "to the young this is a world for action, not for moping and droning in." "As you do," added his sister. "Jane Murdstone, leave it to me, if you please." "I say, David, to the young this is a world for action, and not for moping and droning in. It is especially so for a young boy of your disposition, which requires a great deal of correcting, and to which no greater service can be done than to force it to conform to the ways of the working world, and to bend it and break it. For stubbornness won't do here," said his sister. "What it wants is to be crushed, and crushed it must be. Shall be, too." He gave her a look, half in remonstrance, half in approval, and went on. "I suppose you know, David, that I am not rich. At any rate, you know it now. You have received some considerable education already. Education is costly, and even if it were not, and I could afford it, I am of opinion that it would not be at all advantageous to you to be kept at school. What is before you is a fight with the world, and the sooner you begin it, the better. I think it occurred to me that I had already begun it, in my poor way, but it occurs to me now, whether or no. You have heard the counting-house mentioned sometimes," said Mr. Murdstone. "The counting-house, sir?" I repeated. "Of Murdstone and Grinby, in the wine trade," he replied. I suppose I looked uncertain, for he went on hastily. "You have heard the counting-house mentioned or the business, or the cellars, or the wharf, or something about it. I think I've heard the business mentioned, sir, I said, remembering what I vaguely knew of his and his sister's resources. But I don't know when. It does not matter when, he returned. Mr. Quinion manages that business. I glanced at the latter deferentially as he stood looking out a window. Mr. Quinion suggests that it gives employment to some other boys, and that he sees no reason why it shouldn't, on the same terms, give employment to you. He having, Mr. Quinion observed in a low voice, and half turning round, no other prospect, Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone, with an impatient, even an angry gesture, resumed, without noticing what he had said. Those terms are that you will earn enough for yourself to provide for your eating and drinking and pocket money. Your lodging, which I have arranged for, will be paid by me. So will your washing, which will be kept down to my estimate, said his sister. Your clothes will be looked after for you, too, said Mr. Murdstone, as you will not be able, yet a while, to get them for yourself. So you are now going to London, David, with Mr. Quinion, to begin the world on your own account. In short, you are provided for, observed his sister, and will please to do your duty. Though I quite understood that the purpose of this announcement was to get rid of me, I have no distinct remembrance whether it pleased or frightened me. My impression is that I was in a state of confusion about it, and, oscillating between the 2 points, touched neither. Nor had I much time for the clearing of my thoughts, as Mr. Quinion was to go upon the morrow. Behold me, on the morrow, in a much-worn little white hat, with a black crape round it for my mother, a black jacket, and a pair of hard, stiff corduroy trousers, which Miss Murdstone considered the best armor for the legs in that fight with the world which was now to come off. Behold me, so attired, and with my little worldly all before me in a small trunk, sitting, a lone lorn child, as Mrs. Gummidge might have said, in the post-chaise that was carrying Mr. Quinion to the London coach at Yarmouth. See, how our house and church are lessening in the distance, how the grave beneath the tree is blotted out by intervening objects, how the spire points upwards from my old playground no more, and the sky is empty. Chapter 11. I begin life on my own account and don't like it. I know enough of the world now to have almost lost the capacity of being much surprised by anything, but it is matter of some surprise to me, even now, that I can have been so easily thrown away at such an age. A child of excellent abilities and with strong powers of observation, quick, eager, delicate, and soon hurt bodily or mentally, it seems wonderful to me that nobody should have made any sign in my behalf. But none was made, and I became, at 10 years old, a little laboring hind in the service of Murdstone and Grinby. Murdstone and Grinby's warehouse was at the waterside. It was down in Blackfriars. Modern improvements have altered the place, but it was the last house at the bottom of a narrow street, curving downhill to the river with some stairs at the end where people took boat. It was a crazy old house with a wharf of its own, abutting on the water when the tide was in and on the mud when the tide was out, and literally overrun with rats. Its paneled rooms, discolored with the dirt and smoke of 100 years, I dare say, its decaying floors and staircase, the squeaking and scuffling of the old gray rats down in the cellars, and the dirt and rottenness of the place, are things, not of many years ago, in my mind, but of the present instant. They are all before me, just as they were in the evil hour when I went among them for the first time, with my trembling hand in Mr. Quinion's. Murdstone and Grinby's trade was among a good many kinds of people, but an important branch of it was the supply of wines and spirits to certain packet ships. I forget now where they chiefly went, but I think there were some among them that made voyages both to the East and West Indies. I know that a great many empty bottles were one of the consequences of this traffic, and that certain men and boys were employed to examine them against the light and reject those that were flawed, and to rinse and wash them. When the empty bottles ran short, there were labels to be pasted on full ones, or corks to be fitted to them, or seals to be put upon the corks, or finished bottles to be packed in casks. All this work was my work, and of the boys employed upon it, I was one. There were 3 or 4 of us, counting me. My working place was established in a corner of the warehouse, where Mr. Quinion could see me, when he chose to stand up on the bottom rail of his stool in the counting house and look at me through a window above the desk. Hither, on the first morning of my so auspiciously beginning life on my own account, the oldest of the regular boys was summoned to show me my business. His name was Mick Walker, and he wore a ragged apron and a paper cap. He informed me that his father was a bargeman and walked in a black velvet headdress in the Lord Mayor's show. He also informed me that our principal associate would be another boy whom he introduced by the, to me, extraordinary name of Mealy Potatoes. I discovered, however, that this youth had not been christened by that name, but that it had been bestowed upon him in the warehouse on account of his complexion, which was pale or mealy. Mealy's father was a waterman, who had the additional distinction of being a fireman, and was engaged as such at one of the large theaters, where some young relation of Mealy's, I think his little sister, did imps in the pantomimes. No words can express the secret agony of my soul as I sunk into this companionship. Compare these henceforth everyday associates with those of my happier childhood, not to say with Steerforth, Traddles, and the rest of those boys, and felt my hopes of growing up to be a learned and distinguished man crushed in my bosom. The deep remembrance of the sense I had of being utterly without hope now, of the shame I felt in my position, of the misery it was to my young heart to believe that day by day what I had learned and thought and delighted in, and raised my fancy and my emulation up by, would pass away from me, little by little, never to be brought back any more, cannot be written. As often as Mick Walker went away in the course of that forenoon, I mingled my tears with the water in which I was washing the bottles, and sobbed as if there were a flaw in my own breast, and it were in danger of bursting. The counting-house clock was at 12:30, and there was general preparation for going to dinner, when Mr. Quinion tapped at the counting-house window and beckoned to me to go in. I went in, and found there a stoutish, middle-aged person, in a brown surtout and black tights and shoes, with no more hair upon his head, which was a large one, and very shining, than there is upon an egg, and with a very extensive face, which he turned full upon me. His clothes were shabby, but he had an imposing shirt-collar on. He carried a jaunty sort of stick with a large pair of rusty tassels to it, and a quizzing glass hung outside his coat. For ornament, I afterwards found, as he very seldom looked through it, and couldn't see anything when he did. "This," said Mr. Quinion, in allusion to myself, "is he." "This," said the stranger, with a certain condescending roll in his voice, and a certain indescribable air of doing something genteel, which impressed me very much, "is Master Copperfield." "I hope I see you well, sir." I said I was very well, and hoped he was. I was sufficiently ill at ease, heaven knows, but it was not in my nature to complain much at that time of my life, so I said I was very well, and hoped he was. "I am," said the stranger, "thank heaven, quite well. I have received a letter from Mr. Murdstone, in which he mentions that he would desire me to receive into an apartment in the rear of my house, which is at present unoccupied, and is, in short, to be let as a—" "In short," said the stranger, with a smile and in a burst of confidence, "as a bedroom, the young beginner whom I have now the pleasure to." And the stranger waved his hand and settled his chin in his shirt collar. "This is Mr. Micawber," said Mr. Quinion to me. "Ahem," said the stranger, "that is my name." "Mr. Micawber," said Mr. Quinion, "is known to Mr. Murdstone. He takes orders for us on commission when he can get any. He has been written to by Mr. Murdstone on the subject of your lodgings, and he will receive you as a lodger." "My address," said Mr. Micawber, "is Windsor Terrace, City Road." In short," said Mr. Micawber, with the same genteel air, and in another burst of confidence, "I live there." I made him a bow. "Under the impression," said Mr. Micawber, "that your peregrinations in this metropolis have not as yet been extensive, and that you might have some difficulty in penetrating the arcana of the modern Babylon in the direction of the City Road. In short," said Mr. Micawber, in another burst of confidence, "that you might lose yourself, I shall be happy to call this evening and install you in the knowledge of the nearest way." I thanked him with all my heart, for it was friendly in him to offer to take that trouble. "At what hour," said Mr. Micawber, "shall I?" "At about 8," said Mr. Quinion. "At about 8," said Mr. Micawber. "I beg to wish you good day, Mr. Quinion. I will intrude no longer." So he put on his hat and went out with his cane under his arm, very upright, and humming a tune when he was clear of the counting-house. Mr. Quinion then formally engaged me to be as useful as I could in the warehouse of Murdstone and Grinby at a salary, I think, of 6 shillings a week. I'm not clear whether it was 6 or 7. I am inclined to believe, from my uncertainty on this head, that it was 6 at first and 7 afterwards. He paid me a week down, from his own pocket, I believe, and I gave mealy 6 pence out of it to get my trunk carried to Windsor Terrace that night, it being too heavy for my strength, small as it was. I paid 6 pence more for my dinner, which was a meat pie and a turn at a neighboring pump, and passed the hour which was allowed for that meal in walking about the streets. At the appointed time in the evening, Mr. Micawber reappeared. I washed my hands and face to do the greater honor to his gentility, and we walked to our house, as I suppose I must now call it, together, Mr. Micawber impressing the name of streets and the shapes of corner houses upon me, as we went along, that I might find my way back easily in the morning. Arrived at this house in Windsor Terrace, which I noticed was shabby like himself, but also, like himself, made all the show it could, he presented me to Mrs. Micawber, a thin and faded lady, not at all young, who was sitting in the parlor. The first floor was altogether unfurnished, and the blinds were kept down to delude the neighbors, with a baby at her breast. This baby was one of twins, and I may remark here that I hardly ever, in all my experience of the family, saw both the twins detached from Mrs. Micawber at the same time. One of them was always taking refreshment. There were 2 other children, Master Micawber, aged about 4, and Miss Micawber, aged about 3. These, and a dark-complexioned young woman, with a habit of snorting, who was servant to the family, and informed me, before half an hour had expired, that she was an orphaning, and came from St. Luke's workhouse, in the neighborhood, completed the establishment. My room was at the top of the house, at the back, a close chamber, stenciled all over with an ornament which my young imagination represented as a blue muffin, and very scantily furnished. "I never thought," said Mrs. Micawber, when she came up, twin and all, to show me the apartment, and sat down to take breath, before I was married, when I lived with Papa and Mamma, that I should ever find it necessary to take a lodger. But Mr. Micawber, being in difficulties, all considerations of private feeling must give way. I said, "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Micawber's difficulties are almost overwhelming just at present," said Mrs. Micawber, "and whether it is possible to bring him through them, I don't know. When I lived at home with Papa and Mamma, I really should have hardly understood what the word meant in the sense in which I now employ it, but experientia does it, as Papa used to say. I cannot satisfy myself whether she told me that Mr. Micawber had been an officer in the Marines, or whether I have imagined it. I only know that I believe to this hour that he was in the Marines once upon a time, without knowing why. He was a sort of town traveler for a number of miscellaneous houses now, but made little or nothing of it, I am afraid. If Mr. Micawber's creditors will not give him time, said Mrs. Micawber, they must take the consequences, and the sooner they bring it to an issue the better. Blood cannot be obtained from a stone, neither can anything on account be obtained at present, not to mention law expenses, from Mr. Micawber. I never can quite understand whether my precocious self-dependence confused Mrs. Micawber in reference to my age, or whether she was so full of the subject that she would have talked about it to the very twins if there had been nobody else to communicate with. But this was the strain in which she began, and she went on accordingly all the time I knew her. Poor Mrs. Micawber! She said she had tried to exert herself, and so, I have no doubt she had. The center of the street door was perfectly covered with a great brass plate, on which was engraved Mrs. Micawber's boarding establishment for young ladies. But I never found that any young lady had ever been schooled there, or that any young lady ever came, or proposed to come, or that the least preparation was ever made to receive any young lady. The only visitors I ever saw or heard of were creditors. They used to come at all hours, and some of them were quite ferocious. One dirty-faced man, I think he was a bootmaker, used to edge himself into the passage as early as 7 o'clock in the morning and call up the stairs to Mr. Micawber, "Come, You ain't out yet, you know. Pay us, will you? Don't hide. You know that's mean. I wouldn't be mean if I was you. Pay us, will you? You just pay us, do you hear? Come. Receiving no answer to these taunts, he would mount in his wrath to the words swindlers and robbers, and these being ineffectual too, would sometimes go to the extremity of crossing the street and roaring up at the windows of the second floor, where he knew Mr. McCowber was. At these times, Mr. McCowber would be transported with grief and mortification, even to the length, as I was once made aware by a scream from his wife, of making motions at himself with a razor. But within half an hour afterwards, he would polish up his shoes with extraordinary pains and go out, humming a tune with a greater air of gentility than ever. Mrs. McCowber was quite as elastic. I have known her to be thrown into fainting fits by the king's taxes at 3 o'clock, and to eat lamb chops, breaded, and drink warm ale, paid for with 2 teaspoons that had gone to the pawnbrokers, at 4. On one occasion, when an execution had just been put in, coming home through some chance as early as 6 o'clock, I saw her lying, of course with a twin, under the grate in a swoon, with her hair all torn about her face, but I never knew her more cheerful than she was that very same night, over a veal cutlet before the kitchen fire, telling me stories about her papa and mama, and the company they used to keep. In this house and with this family, I passed my leisure time. My own exclusive breakfast of a penny loaf and a pennyworth of milk, I provided myself. I kept another small loaf and a modicum of cheese on a particular shelf of a particular cupboard to make my supper on when I came back at night. This made a hole in the 6 or 7 shillings, I know well, and I was out at the warehouse all day and had to support myself on that money all the week. From Monday morning until Saturday night, I had no advice, no counsel, no encouragement, no consolation, no assistance, no support of any kind from anyone that I can call to mind, as I hope to go to heaven. I was so young and childish and so little qualified. How could I be otherwise? To undertake the whole charge of my own existence, that often, in going to Murdstone and Grinby's of a morning, I could not resist the stale pastry put out for sale at half price at the pastrycook's doors, and spending that the money I should have kept for my dinner. Then I went without my dinner, or bought a roll or a slice of pudding. I remember 2 pudding shops, between which I was divided, according to my finances. One was in a court close to St. Martin's Church, at the back of the church, which is now removed altogether. The pudding at that shop was made of currants, and was rather a special pudding, but was dear, 2 worth not being larger than a pennyworth of more ordinary pudding. A good shop for the latter was in the Strand, somewhere in that part, which has been rebuilt since. It was a stout pail, pudding, heavy and flabby, and with great flat raisins in it, stuck in whole at wide distances apart. It came up hot at about my time every day, and many a day did I dine off it. When I dined regularly and handsomely, I had a saveloy and a penny loaf, or a 4-penny plate of red beef from cook's shop, or a plate of bread and cheese and a glass of beer from a miserable old public house opposite our place of business, called the Lion or the Lion, and something else that I have forgotten. Once I remember carrying my own bread, which I had brought from home in the morning, under my arm, wrapped in a piece of paper like a book, and going to a famous a la mode beef house near Drury Lane, and ordering a small plate of that delicacy to eat with it. What the waiter thought of such a strange little apparition coming in all alone, I don't know, but I can see him now, staring at me as I ate my dinner and bringing up the other waiter to look. I gave him a halfpenny for himself, and I wish he hadn't taken it. We had half an hour, I think, for tea. When I had money enough, I used to get half a pint of ready-made coffee and a slice of bread and butter. When I had none, I used to look at a venison shop in Fleet Street, or I have strolled at such a time as far as Covent Garden Market and stared at the pineapples. I was fond of wandering about the Adelphi, because it was a mysterious place with those dark arches. I see myself emerging one evening from some of these arches on a little public house close to the river, with an open space before it, where some coal heavers were dancing, to look at whom I sat down upon a bench. I wonder what they thought of me. I was such a child, and so little, that frequently when I went into the bar of a strange public house for a glass of ale or porter to moisten what I had had for dinner, they were afraid to give it me. I remember one hot evening I went into the bar of a public house and said to the landlord, What is your best? Your very best? Ale a glass. For it was a special occasion. I don't know what. It may have been my birthday. Tuppence halfpenny, says the landlord, is the price of the genuine stunning ale. Then, says I, producing the money, just draw me a glass of the genuine stunning, if you please, with a good head to it. The landlord looked at me in return over the bar, from head to foot, with a strange smile on his face, and instead of drawing the beer, looked round the screen and said something to his wife. She came out from behind it, with her work in her hand, and joined him in surveying me. Here we stand, all three, before me now. The landlord in his shirt sleeves, leaning against the bar window frame, his wife looking over the little half-door, and I, in some confusion, looking up at them from outside the partition. They asked me a good many questions, as what my name was, how old I was, where I lived, how I was employed, and how I came there. To all of which, that I might commit nobody, I invented, I am afraid, appropriate answers. They served me with the ale, though I suspect it was not the genuine stunning, and the landlord's wife, opening the little half-door of the bar and bending down, gave me my money back and gave me a kiss that was half admiring and half compassionate, but all womanly and good, I am sure. I know I do not exaggerate, unconsciously and unintentionally, the scantiness of my resources or the difficulties of my life. I know that if a shilling were given me by Mr. Quinion at any time, I spent it in a dinner or a tea. I know that I worked from morning until night with common men and boys, a shabby child. I know that I lounged about the streets, insufficiently and unsatisfactorily fed. I know that, but for the mercy of God, I might easily have been, for any care that was taken of me, a little robber or a little vagabond. Yet I held some station at Murdstone and Grimby's too. Besides that, Mr. Quinion did what a careless man so occupied, and dealing with a thing so anomalous, could, to treat me as one upon a different footing from the rest. I never said to man or boy how it was that I came to be there, or gave the least indication of being sorry that I was there. That I suffered in secret, and that I suffered exquisitely, no one ever knew but I. How much I suffered, it is, as I have said already, utterly beyond my power to tell. But I kept my own counsel, and I did my work. I knew from the first that if I could not do my work as well as any of the rest, I could not hold myself above slight and contempt. I soon became at least as expeditious and as skillful as either of the other boys. Though perfectly familiar with them, my conduct and manner were different enough from theirs to place a space between us. They and the men generally spoke of me as the little gent or the young suffocator. A certain man named Gregory, who was foreman of the packers, and another named Tip, who was the carman, and wore a red jacket, used to address me sometimes as David, but I think it was mostly when we were very confidential, and when I had made some efforts to entertain them, over our work, with some results of the old readings, which were fast perishing out of my remembrance. Mealy Potatoes uprose once, and rebelled against my being so distinguished, but Mick Walker settled him in no time. My rescue from this kind of existence I considered quite hopeless, and abandoned, as such, altogether. I am solemnly convinced that I never for 1 hour was reconciled to it, or was otherwise than miserably unhappy. But I bore it, and even to Peggotty, partly for the love of her, and partly for shame, never in any letter, though many passed between us, revealed the truth. Mr. Micawber's difficulties were an addition to the distressed state of my mind. In my forlorn state, I became quite attached to the family, and used to walk about, busy with Mrs. Micawber's calculations of ways and means, and heavy with the weight of Mr. Micawber's debts, on a Saturday night, which was my grand treat, partly because it was a great thing to walk home with 6 or 7 shillings in my pocket, looking into the shops and thinking what such a sum would buy, and partly because I went home early. Mrs. Micawber would make the most heart-rending confidences to me. Also on a Sunday morning, when I mixed the portion of tea or coffee I had bought overnight in a little shaving pot, and sat late at my breakfast. It was nothing at all unusual for Mr. Micawber to sob violently at the beginning of one of these Saturday night conversations, and sing about Jack's delight being his lovely Nan towards the end of it. I have known him come home to supper with a flood of tears, and a declaration that nothing was now left but a jail, and go to bed making a calculation of the expense of putting bow windows to the house, in case anything turned up, which was his favorite expression. And Mrs. McCowber was just the same. A curious equality of friendship, originating, I suppose, in our respective circumstances, sprung up between me and these people, notwithstanding the ludicrous disparity in our years. But I never allowed myself to be prevailed upon to accept any invitation to eat and drink with them out of their stock, knowing that they got on badly with the butcher and baker, and had often not too much for themselves, until Mrs. McCowber took me into her entire confidence. This she did one evening as follows. "Master Copperfield," said Mrs. McCowber, "I make no stranger of you, and therefore do not hesitate to say that Mr. McCowber's difficulties are coming to a crisis." It made me very miserable to hear it, and I looked at Mrs. McCowber's red eyes with the utmost sympathy. "With the exception of a heel of a Dutch cheese, which is not adapted to the wants of a young family," said Mrs. McCowber, "there is really not a scrap of anything in the larder. I was accustomed to speak of the larder when I lived with Papa and Mama, and I use the word almost unconsciously. What I mean to express is that there is nothing to eat in the house." "Dear me," I said in great concern. I had 2 or 3 shillings of my week's money in my pocket, from which I presumed that it must have been on a Wednesday night when we held this conversation, and I hastily produced them, and with heartfelt emotion begged Mrs. McCowber to accept of them as a loan. But that lady, kissing me and making me put them back in my pocket, replied that she couldn't think of it. "No, my dear Master Copperfield," said she, "far be it from my thoughts. But you have a discretion beyond your years, and can render me another kind of service, if you will, and a service I will thankfully accept of." I begged Mrs. McCowber to name it. "I have parted with the plate myself," said Mrs. McCowber. 6 tea, 2 salt, and a pair of sugars I have at different times borrowed money on in secret with my own hands. But the twins are a great tie, and to me, with my recollections of Papa and Mama, these transactions are very painful. There are still a few trifles that we could part with. Mr. McCowber's feelings would never allow him to dispose of them. And Clickett, this was the girl from the workhouse, being of a vulgar mind, would take painful liberties if so much confidence was reposed in her. "Master Copperfield, if I might ask you," I understood Mrs. McCowber now, and begged her to make use of me to any extent. I began to dispose of the more portable articles of property that very evening, and went out on a similar expedition almost every morning before I went to Murdstone and Grinby's. Mr. McCowber had a few books on a little chiffonier, which he called the library, and those went first. I carried them, one after another, to a bookstall on the city road, one part of which, near our house, was almost all bookstalls and bird shops then, and sold them for whatever they would bring. The keeper of this bookstall, who lived in a little house behind it, used to get tipsy every night, and to be violently scolded by his wife every morning. More than once, when I went there early, I had audience of him in a turn-up bedstead, with a cut in his forehead or a black eye, bearing witness to his excesses overnight. I am afraid he was quarrelsome in his drink, and he, with a shaking hand, endeavoring to find the needful shillings in one or other of the pockets of his clothes, which lay upon the floor, while his wife, with a baby in her arms and her shoes down at heel, never left off rating him. Sometimes he had lost his money, and then he would ask me to call again, but his wife had always got some, had taken his, I dare say, while he was drunk, and secretly completed the bargain on the stairs as we went down together. At the pawnbroker's shop, too, I began to be very well known. The principal gentleman who officiated behind the counter took a good deal of notice of me, and often got me, I recollect, to decline a Latin noun or adjective, or to conjugate a Latin verb, in his ear, while he transacted my business. After all these occasions, Mrs. McCowber made a little treat, which was generally a supper, and there was a peculiar relish in these meals which I well remember. At last, Mr. McCowber's difficulties came to a crisis, and he was arrested early one morning and carried over to the King's Bench prison in the Borough. He told me, as he went out of the house, that the god of day had now gone down upon him, and I really thought his heart was broken and mine too. But I heard, afterwards, that he was seen to play a lively game at skittles before noon. On the first Sunday after he was taken there, I was to go and see him and have dinner with him. I was to ask my way to such a place, and just short of that place I should see such another place, and just short of that I should see a yard which I was to cross, and keep straight on until I saw a turnkey. All this I did, and when at last I did see a turnkey, poor little fellow that I was, and thought how, when Roderick Random was in a debtor's prison, there was a man there with nothing on him but an old rug, the turnkey swam before my dimmed eyes and my beating heart. Mr. Micawber was waiting for me within the gate, and we went up to his room, top story but one, and cried very much. He solemnly conjured me, I remember, to take warning by his fate, and to observe that if a man had £20 a year for his income, and spent £19 19 shillings and sixpence, he would be happy, but that if he spent £20 one, he would be miserable. After which he borrowed a shilling of me for porter, gave me a written order on Mrs. Micawber for the amount, and put away his pocket handkerchief, and cheered up. We sat before a little fire, with 2 bricks put within the rusted grate, one on each side, to prevent its burning too many coals, until another debtor, who shared the room with Mr. Micawber, came in from the bakehouse with the loin of mutton, which was our joint stock repast. Then I was sent up to Captain Hopkins in the room overhead, with Mr. Micawber's compliments, and I was his young friend, and would Captain Hopkins lend me a knife and fork. Captain Hopkins lent me the knife and fork, with his compliments to Mr. Micawber. There was a very dirty lady in his little room, and 2 wan girls, his daughters, with shock heads of hair. I thought it was better to borrow Captain Hopkins's knife and fork than Captain Hopkins's comb. The captain himself was in the last extremity of shabbiness, with large whiskers and an old brown greatcoat with no other coat below it. I saw his bed rolled up in a corner, and what plates and dishes and pots he had, on a shelf, and I divined, God knows how, that though the 2 girls with the shock heads of hair were Captain Hopkins's children, the dirty lady was not married to Captain Hopkins. My timid station on his threshold was not occupied more than a couple of minutes at most, but I came down again with all this in my knowledge, as surely as the knife and fork were in my hand. There was something gypsy-like and agreeable in the dinner. After all, I took back Captain Hopkins's knife and fork early in the afternoon, and went home to comfort Mrs. Micawber with an account of my visit. She fainted when she saw me return, and made a little jug of egg hot afterwards to console us while we talked it over. I don't know how the household furniture came to be sold for the family benefit, or who sold it, except that I did not. Sold it was, however, and carried away in a van, except the bed, a few chairs, and the kitchen table. With these possessions we encamped, as it were, in the 2 parlors of the emptied house in Windsor Terrace. Mrs. Micawber, the children, the orpheling, and myself, and lived in those rooms night and day. I have no idea for how long, though it seems to me for a long time. At last Mrs. Micawber resolved to move into the prison, where Mr. Micawber had now secured a room to himself. So I took the key of the house to the landlord, who was very glad to get it, and the beds were sent over to the King's Bench, except mine, for which a little room was hired outside the walls in the neighborhood of that institution, very much to my satisfaction, since the Micawbers and I had become too used to one another in our troubles to part. The orpheling was likewise accommodated with an inexpensive lodging in the same neighborhood. Mine was a quiet back garret with a sloping roof, commanding a pleasant prospect of a timber yard, and when I took possession of it, with the reflection that Mr. Micawber's troubles had come to a crisis at last, I thought it quite a paradise. All this time, I was working at Murdstone and Grinby's in the same common way, and with the same common companions, and with the same sense of unmerited degradation as at first. But I never, happily for me no doubt, made a single acquaintance, or spoke to any of the many boys whom I saw daily in going to the warehouse, in coming from it, and in prowling about the streets at meal times. I led the same secretly unhappy life, but I led it in the same lonely, self-reliant manner. The only changes I am conscious of are, firstly, that I had grown more shabby, and secondly, that I was now relieved of much of the weight of Mr. and Mrs. Micawber's cares, for some relatives or friends had engaged to help them at their present pass, and they lived more comfortably in the prison than they had lived for a long while out of it. I used to breakfast with them now, in virtue of some arrangement, of which I have forgotten the details. I forget, too, at what hour the gates were opened in the morning, admitting of my going in, but I know that I was often up at 6 o'clock, and that my favorite lounging place in the interval was Old London Bridge, where I was wont to sit in one of the stone recesses, watching the people going by, or to look over the balustrades at the sun shining in the water and lighting up the golden flame on the top of the monument. The Orpheling met me here sometimes, to be told some astonishing fictions respecting the wharves and the tower, of which I can say no more than that I hope I believe them myself. In the evening I used to go back to the prison and walk up and down the parade with Mr. Micawber, or play casino with Mrs. Micawber, and hear reminiscences of her papa and mamma. Whether Mr. Murdstone knew where I was, I'm unable to say. I never told him at Murdstone and Grimby's. Mr. Micawber's affairs, although past their crisis, were very much involved by reason of a certain deed, of which I used to hear a great deal, and which I suppose now to have been some former composition with his creditors, though I was so far from being clear about it then, that I am conscious of having confounded it with those demoniacal parchments which are held to have, once upon a time, obtained to a great extent in Germany. At last this document appeared to be got out of the way. Somehow, at all events, it ceased to be the rock-ahead it had been, and Mrs. Micawber informed me that her family had decided that Mr. Micawber should apply for his release under the Insolvent Debtors Act, which would set him free, she expected, in about 6 weeks. And then, said Mr. Micawber, who was present, I have no doubt I shall, please heaven, begin to be beforehand with the world, and to live in a perfectly new manner if, in short, if anything turns up. By way of going in for anything that might be on the cards, I call to mind that Mr. Micawber, about this time, composed a petition to the House of Commons, praying for an alteration in the law of imprisonment for debt. I set down this remembrance here, because it is an instance to myself of the manner in which I fitted my old books to my altered life, and made stories for myself, out of the streets and out of men and women, and how some main points in the character I shall unconsciously develop, I suppose, in writing my life, were gradually forming all this while. There was a club in the prison, in which Mr. Micawber, as a gentleman, was a great authority. Mr. Micawber had stated his idea of this petition to the club, and the club had strongly approved of the same. Wherefore Mr. Micawber, who was a thoroughly good-natured man, and as active a creature about everything but his own affairs as ever existed, and never so happy as when he was busy about something that could never be of any profit to him, set to work at the petition, invented it, engrossed it on an immense sheet of paper, spread it out on a table, and appointed a time for all the club, and all within the walls if they chose, to come up to his room and sign it. When I heard of this approaching ceremony, I was so anxious to see them all come in, one after another, though I knew the greater part of them already, and they me, that I got an hour's leave of absence from Murdstone and Grimby's, and established myself in a corner for that purpose. As many of the principal members of the club as could be got into the small room without filling it, supported Mr. Micawber in front of the petition, while my old friend Captain Hopkins, who had washed himself, to do honor to so solemn an occasion, stationed himself close to it, to read it to all who were unacquainted with its contents. The door was then thrown open, and the general population began to come in a long file, several waiting outside, while one entered, affixed his signature, and went out. To everybody in succession, Captain Hopkins said, "Have you read it?" "No. Dash. Would you like to hear it read?" If he weakly showed the least disposition to hear it, Captain Hopkins, in a loud, sonorous voice, gave him every word of it. The captain would have read it 20,000 times, if 20,000 people would have heard him, one by one. I remember a certain luscious roll he gave to such phrases as "the people's representatives in Parliament assembled. Your petitioners therefore humbly approach your honorable house, His Gracious Majesty's unfortunate subjects," as if the words were something real in his mouth and delicious to taste. Mr. Micawber, meanwhile, listening with a little of an author's vanity and contemplating, not severely, the spikes on the opposite wall. As I walked to and fro daily between Southwark and Blackfriars, and lounged about at meal times in obscure streets, the stones of which may, for anything I know, be worn at this moment by my childish feet, I wonder how many of these people were wanting in the crowd that used to come filing before me in review again, to the echo of Captain Hopkins's voice. When my thoughts go back, now, to that slow agony of my youth, I wonder how much of the histories I invented for such people hangs like a mist of fancy over well-remembered facts. When I tread the old ground, I do not wonder that I seem to see and pity, going on before me, an innocent romantic boy, making his imaginative world out of such strange experiences and sordid things.